Good afternoon and welcome back to Blackpool for the first day of the Labour Party conference. The discussions inside the conference hall has been on the economy, and there's no doubt though what's been the headline issue out and about around the conference hall, and that's the minimum wage. The leadership at the weekend hoped they'd put a lid on it. The lid today keeps flipping off. With me now is the BBC's political correspondent Nicholas Jones. Nick, what's the problem? Is it about the level of the minimum wage, whether it should be in the manifesto, whether it should be phased in what?
What has happened is that there was quite a deal done at the weekend when it was agreed that the figure for a minimum wage, which the unions want, of £4 an hour, was taken out of all the conference motions that are now before the delegates. What's happened is that because of statements being made by Labour leaders, first by Robin Cook this morning when he said it might not be possible to introduce that national minimum wage at one go, and Tony Blair is going a little further, saying the party might not be able to rush at the minimum wage. That, I think, has created a great deal of anxiety, which surfaced this morning.
There was that famous incident a couple of years back when Neil Kinnock went to dinner with a few political journalists at Luigi's and said national insurance contributions might be phased in, and that upset all sorts of people. Is this causing similar upset?
Yes, we saw the big union leaders really, I think, going much further than many of us had expected this morning in making clear their concern. Rodney Bickerstaff of Unison saying, look, the Labour Party has chucked enough overboard of our existing policies. He was making pretty sure he didn't want the minimum wage chucked overboard. And not only that, Bill Morris was there making it quite clear that if he was there standing up for people who were going to get £4 an hour, he was prepared to do so. And so was the rest of his union. They were all guilty, he said.
I think we all thought to some extent that perhaps this week in Blackpool might be a bit of a love-in with Tony Blair. It doesn't seem to be working out quite like that, does it?
No, it has. I think that has been disproved, and disproved pretty clearly this morning. There were these attempts all over the weekend to make sure that there wasn't any unease shown on the conference floor, but we are seeing that, and the unions now, I think, have become nervous because I think during the last week we've seen the Labour Party move much further than many expected to ditch the old tax and spend philosophy.
Do you think that Tony Blair is quietly satisfied that he's provoked them? Was he seeking to provoke them? Was there a political game plan there?
I think that there's certainly every readiness on his part to face out the union leaders if the going gets tough. But equally, he does have a management problem as leader, and I think that the party will be upset if we do see further manifestations, and that looks likely now, between Mr. Blair and the big unions, further signs of confrontation. And if you look at the slogan above the delegates, it says New Labour. Now, the N for new is a small letter at the moment. I think what most of the union delegates fear is that perhaps they'll come back next year and the title of the party is New Labour, and all the old policies will have been ditched.
How worried do you sense the unions are by this? Because didn't Tony Blair map this all out pretty clearly during his leadership campaign?
Yes, but the big unions were prepared to give Mr. Blair the benefit of the doubt because there are all these formulas that are built in. There's going to be a commission that's going to look at the national minimum wage. Now, the unions are taking part in that. They have set great store by that whole process, but I think they are beginning to feel that even those assurances are being eaten away, are being removed one by one, and that, I think, has caused the concern.
Nicholas Jones, thank you very much. Huw?
John, I'm joined by the gentleman who does have the answers. Whether he gives them to us is another matter. Mr. Brown, welcome. Shadow Chancellor. Can we sort out this problem about phasing in the national minimum wage, first of all? There seems to be some element of growing confusion about it. Is it a prospect?
Well, I don't think there's any confusion at all. I've heard what Neil Kinnock, John Prescott and Robin Cook said, and the national minimum wage is based on this. First of all, today we're accepting the principle. Secondly, it is going to be national. Thirdly, it's going to be statutory. And fourthly, it's going to involve all adults, men and women, who will have these rights. Now, the detail of the policy will be worked out in the Economic Policy Commission, and that's what we're going to do now.
Is it a prospect that it might be phased in?
What we're talking about is looking at the detail now, and I think Tony Blair has said this evening in an interview already recorded, we're going to be flexible and sensitive. But the important thing is the principle is accepted, it's going to be national, it's going to be statutory. I think that is what people expect, and you may remember that Rodney Bickerstaff came to the rostrum saying, I come in peace, although Nick Jones is trying to make out that there's some huge conflict. All these issues in detail will now be discussed by the Economic Policy Commission. And indeed, some of the people speaking today from the floor are actually on the Economic Policy Commission.
Let me just remind you what your colleague Robin Cook was saying this earlier today. It may not be a step you can take immediately or at one go. Or at one go. Now, what is that if it is not a hint that it may have to be brought in phases or phased in?
No, I think you're wrong. I think it's exactly what Tony Blair has said today about flexibility and sensitivity. We'll be flexible in the way that we introduce it, in the sense that we've always said, for example, that young workers will not be included as part of the minimum wage. We'll be sensitive because we will consult before we reach the final detailed proposals. There is no disagreement between any member of the Labour team on it. And I think, frankly, the attempts to stir up disagreement where none exists remind me of what was being said this morning by a BBC correspondent, that hell has no fury than a newspaper journalist in search of a Labour Party split and cannot find one, and there is none.
So when you come up with your figure at the end of the day, whatever the figure is, that policy will be implemented, and that will be the figure upon which the policy will be based. There will be no suggestion of moving to, let's say, from £1.50 to £2.50 to £3.50, phasing it into £4.50, if that is the figure at the end of the day.
You wouldn't expect the minimum wage always to remain the same every year. There's going to have to be a look at how we do that. But all the detail will be discussed by the Economic Policy Commission. The important thing today is this. It is national, it is statutory, it affects all adults, the principle has been accepted, and now we look at the detail based actually on what's happening in other countries in Europe and America, which we'll look at, as well as the experience of what has been poverty pay, lower pay, facing large numbers of workers in Britain. I think there is agreement in the conference, and if I remind you, that the motion today is being supported by the people that Nick Jones is somehow hinting are against it. They are supporting the proposal.
The principle is certainly clear. I'm just saying that the option of phasing it in, therefore, is not ruled out.
We're looking at all the detail, and I think that is what you would expect me to do. But it's based very clearly, so there's no doubt about it, on not only us welcoming the principle, because it's good for social justice, good for economic efficiency, but saying it is statutory, it is national, it'll affect all adult men and women.
Now, I know that even if I give you £1 million, you wouldn't give me any figures. I'm not asking you for figures. I'm asking you whether a figure will feature in the manifesto when that manifesto comes out. A figure.
Well, we've got to work out the detail, and we will report to the conference. The one thing that is absolutely clear is that this will be examined in the best detail possible. As I said this morning, we want to set the minimum wage at a level that will give decency and dignity in the workplace. You see, I think what we've got to do around the country is win this argument on principle, sometimes with employers who've been reluctant to support it. And once they see that we're talking about something that happens in Europe, it happens in America, every other country, in fact, of the European community has a minimum wage, then I think many of the fears will go. It's about social justice, but it's also about a more efficient economy. And I believe I can prove, even to the doubters in the country, that the principle is good for British industry.
If that is so, why can't you tell me now that there'll be a figure in the manifesto?
Because all the detail is to be worked out by the Economic Policy Commission.
Even after the detail's worked out, why can't there be a figure?
You started off, Huw, this week saying there was going to be an argument about the principle, then an argument about the formula, then an argument about something else. I think you're trying to find arguments where none exist. The fact of the matter is, Robin Cook, Neil Kinnock, who did an interview also, Tony Blair, who's spoken on the matter, John Prescott and I are saying exactly the same things. We support the principle, it's statutory, it's national, it will be implemented for all adult men and women. And I think once people understand that, then any doubts that people may have are dispelled.
I think the fact that you're going to work out the details is perfectly understandable, and people have taken that on board.
I think that's
fine.
The responsible thing to do.
Once you come to the end of that process, you'll come up with a figure. Will that figure be in the manifesto?
I don't think you would announce a figure until you've done the detailed work. And what I'm saying is we'll put these matters to the Commission. They will decide what will come to the party conference. It will be in the spirit of the recommendations that have been made today. And I think it's very important that we now move ahead to do the detailed work.
Mr. Brown, can I just refer you to something said by Keith Skeoch from James Capel earlier today, when he said that the city was more worried about your commitment to the social chapter than to your commitment about the minimum wage, which we've just been discussing. Does that bother you at all, the sense that the city is focusing on that as a greater bone of contention?
Well, I'm glad that the minimum wage is not such a big issue with the city. And I think I can prove that it's good for social justice, but also good for economic efficiency. As far as the social chapter is concerned, I think it's very strange to find a city economist who's, after all, investing these days, not just in Britain, but in Germany, in France, in Italy, in all these other countries, saying that what is unacceptable in Britain is something actually that we have, and they don't seem to criticise in Germany, France, and Italy. The social chapter is signed by every other country in the European community. The irony and the anomaly is that Britain is not part of it. And I don't think that there are costs involved, for example, in giving employees information before there's takeovers, giving them information about what's actually happening in their own firm. And I think most good companies are actually implementing these practices at the moment.
Very quick point before I let you go, Mr. Brown. On tax, Mr. Blair has been quite clear talking about middle-income earners. Are we in a position where we can say, you middle-income earners will not face any kind of tax rises under the Labour government?
But we do not want to propose tax rises for middle-income Britain, who's now facing, I think, the equivalent of 7p in the pound rise in their basic taxes. And what we will do is bring forward our proposals in detail before the next election. The fact of the matter is, the best deal on tax is going to be got from the party that can give us the best economic growth. And I think our policies today about industrial revival, about investment in industry, give us the best guarantee of having the most successful economy.
Mr. Brown, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
John, it's all yours.
Huw, one of the most passionate speeches in favour of the minimum wage came from the Transport Union General Secretary Bill Morris. He's with me now. Mr. Morris, how do you react to some talk that it may be that the minimum wage would be phased in, there wouldn't be a level set on it, it might not even be in the manifesto?
Well, of course, the minimum wage was just one element in composite number 2, where we discussed the key issue of the week, which was full employment. They also went on to discuss the issue of social justice, and I believe that we have now set a framework, inclusive, of course, of the minimum wage. But for us, it was a composite about full employment, and full employment will dominate this conference.
But we've heard hints from Robin Cook, Tony Blair, Neil Kinnock, that the minimum wage might be phased in somehow, that it wouldn't be brought in immediately. What's your reaction to that?
Well, as Gordon Brown says, the discussion about the minimum wage will be part of the Commission's work. But I want to focus on precisely what this composite was about. It's taken us a very long time to put the issue of full employment on everybody's agenda. We won the arguments at the TUC, and we're winning the arguments here. We are saying it's not just a matter of sort of talking about precisely what the numbers should be, but it's a new economic framework, a new economic strategy, and we are saying that we are going to go out and campaign to ensure that the 3 million people who are looking to this conference for real hope will in fact secure some hope about jobs and about employment.
Of course, but we're focusing on the minimum wage, and we've talked a lot about full employment as well. With regard to full employment, there has been talk of phasing it in. Do you feel happy with that?
But the first priority is to have a job, and then you discuss and argue about precisely what the rate of pay should be. And that's what we say is the priority for this week,
well,
full employment. And let me make it absolutely clear. Every single delegate in that room has come here not to be diverted by any other issue, but to focus on the theme of the week, which is full employment and social justice.
Mr. Morris,
I'm not seeking
to divert you. The issue of the minimum wage is pretty central, isn't it?
Of course, it's absolutely key, and that's why we have it included in Composite 2, but we will not be diverted from the real issue of Composite 2, which is full employment, because the unemployed know that unless they have a job, it's useless talking about the rates of pay unless you have a job.
Well, okay, but what would you feel if there were a manifesto that didn't say at what level the minimum wage should be set?
I'd be very disappointed in a manifesto that didn't indicate very clearly about how we're going to address the question of jobs, whether or not we're going to set targets, whether or not we set out the right economic framework, which will give us an opportunity.
Sorry, the question was about if it didn't set out what the level of a minimum wage should be.
As far as I'm concerned, it's about priorities, and politics is about priority, and we've made it absolutely clear. My union has put the minimum wage in Composite 2, but my union clearly understands that the first priority must be jobs, employment, and full employment. And as John Smith said to us just over a year ago, it's not just full employment, but fulfilling employment. That's why in my speech this morning I talk about the working poor. A lot of people who have got jobs and yet they're still living in poverty.
Mr.
And
Morris,
that's the central feature of the week.
Interpret your wariness and reluctance to answer the specific questions about the minimum wage and what the level of it should be as a sign that perhaps there is a disagreement within the Labour leadership and the unions over the way the party is proceeding.
Let me remind you of your opening comments that I made the most passionate speech this morning on the subject. So there's no reticence on my part. My speech is on record.
But then why can't you say whether you are in favour of a level being set on the minimum wage?
I have said it in the conference, and I refer you to my speech, copies of which are in the press office. But I also have a responsibility to the 3 million people who are out of work. Many of them were former members of my union. They want to know precisely what this conference is going to offer to them by way of an opportunity for jobs and employment.
Let me put it bluntly, as I've heard it expressed by some union people here, that you're worried that the Labour leadership is backsliding on its commitment to the minimum wage.
Well, you can put it how you like. I spelled out the TNG's position in the conference this morning. A copy of my speech is in the press office. And I say again, we can talk about the minimum wage as we have very clearly sketched out precisely where we are in terms of the formula, looking to the future and opportunity to Britain are the two key policy documents that we will build on. That sets out the formula. Gordon Brown has said, we take it into the policy commission and we develop our ideas and we will come forward. But I must come back to the central issue. For the 3 million people out of work, they will not be arguing what rate the job should be. They'll be saying, where is the job?
And one very quick final question. You said that the jury was out about a month ago on Tony Blair's leadership.
I did not say that. I was asked a question about the relationship between trade unions and the Labour leadership, given the fact that Tony Blair had rightly said that there will be no favours, just absolute justice. We support that view, and I was asked, where will the relationship go if that trend continues? And I said, it's early days, yet the jury is out. Not on his leadership, but on the relationship.
All right, well, okay, on that specific one, very quickly, do you think that he's going in the right way or the wrong way?
As far as I'm concerned, it's an evolving relationship. It's been there for a number of years. There's no blank check around here, not from Tony Blair, but not from the trade unions. We will continue to develop the dialogue. But whatever happens, we are leaving this conference achieving our central objective to make sure that full employment is on the political agenda of this party and indeed other political parties as well.
Bill Morris, thank you very much indeed. Sheena?
John, thank you. Here in the hall, the economic debate is about to continue. At the moment, a fraternal message is being delivered from a member of the German STP. With me is Joyce Gould, who is guiding us through the entrails, if you like, of conference. Let's just see who's on the platform. And there's Pauline Green, Joyce.
Yes, Pauline is the chair of the president of the Socialist group in the European Parliament. It's the first time we've had a British president, and it's certainly the first time we've had a woman, and that is extremely good news indeed.
Now, of course, gender proportion is an issue in the Labour movement in general. It's likely to be probably an issue of some friction later in the conference. And sitting beside Pauline, we see a woman who may actually lose out for reasons of gender in the NEC elections.
Yeah, well, the next person is Brenda Etchells, and she is actually in the women's section of the NEC. But as Margaret Beckett is standing in that section, and is almost certain to get on, it means that one of the women is going to fall off, and it could be Brenda. I mean, we won't know till later this afternoon.
And looking at the platform, we can see retiring chair David Blunkett, beside him Neil Kinnock, of course, on the platform as a member of the NEC, but outgoing because he's moving to Europe.
That's right. He takes up his job on the 1st of January, but he's obviously busy already working in Europe. And he is one of the 3 vacancies that's been created in the constituents section of the NEC.
Let's move now to hear what the speaker at the platform, Klaus Hansch, MEP, is saying to Congress. He's president of the European Parliament.
Our way of life, the approach which is our common point, from Helsinki to Barcelona, from Athens to Edinburgh, is based on a balance between a competitive market and decent living standards and social provision for all. And our European Union must be based on values: democracy, human rights, sense of community and solidarity, and above all, social justice. So our internal market, if it is to work and to be accepted, must have a social dimension and proper provision for health and safety at work, basic legal rights for people at work, and consultation and information of employees. The social chapter, comrades, supported by an overwhelming majority of the European Parliament, embodies these demands and values. It is based on the notion of guaranteeing at least a minimum regulation of the internal market to protect those most in need. Comrades, there is a school of thought, I hardly need to tell you where, that says that the social chapter will handicap industry, will make us uncompetitive, will destroy jobs. What they are really saying is that we cannot afford social justice. This is a counsel of despair. It is also false. I do not believe that Europe's only way forward is sweatshops, wages, unsafe working conditions, and uncontrolled pollution. If one of our least prosperous countries, like Portugal, can afford to implement a decent system of parental leave and protection of pregnant women, why cannot we all do it? If countries like Greece and Ireland can protect young people at work, then why cannot we all? Do you think for a single moment that German business or a German conservative government would accept a social chapter which would destroy the competitiveness of German industry? Would you really think a moment on this? No. There is another way, comrades. Nearly all of our member states, businesses and trade unions believe that it is possible to kickstart the European economy without abandoning the welfare state and our social services. But this project needs new aims. We need now to recapture the imagination of European electorate with popular and imaginative proposals for the future. Let the full resources of Europe get to work to produce the clean car. Let's get business, the scientific community, governments and the unions to collaborate on this project to protect our environment. Let's set ourselves a target. Let's clean up our rivers and beaches in Blackpool and elsewhere. Let us have new European action to tackle the pollution blight of our coasts and waterways. And let us have active European diplomacy for peace. This union is a symbol of peace, born from the despair of war. We have an immense contribution to make to solving conflicts throughout the world and nearer home in our own union in the island of Ireland. Early action by the European Union, acting on behalf of the United Nations, can help to stop the Rwandas, the Bosnias, and the potential conflicts in many of the world regions. The progressive forces throughout Europe are now determined to make this union work. And I know that Labour, with your powerful internationalist traditions, and with your dynamic new leader, Tony Blair, will do its utmost to reform and revive the Union in the spirit in which it was born, in peace and in the name of social justice. I was born in 1938 in Strotau, in Silesia, which then was a German country and now is part of Poland. 1 year before the Nazi subjugation of Poland took place. Like so many of my fellow Europeans, my first memories are of the suffering and deprivations of war. This is the mainspring of my passion for Europe and my determination that never again must Europe allow itself to be riven by nationalism, racism, and war.
And Klaus Hansch, President of the European Parliament, upholding the principle of the minimum wage and European unity. The debate continues outside the hall. John.
Sheena, some of the most interesting debate is taking place about the minimum wage. I'm joined now by the General Secretary of the GMB, Jon Edwards. Mr. Edwards, good afternoon. The minimum wage, there's been a lot of talk about whether it should be phased in, whether it should be a level set on it. Do you feel happy about there being no level set on the minimum wage?
I feel happy about the process that is being established. We have a clear formula. We have an Economic Policy Commission in place, of which I'm a member, which is going to work out the details of how it's going to be implemented next year. Now, what could be much more reasonable than that?
Absolutely nothing. So the formula in place is to how to calculate what the minimum wage should be come an election.
That's the way we get to the figure. And it's been made clear from the rostrum. I've heard Tony Blair say on 4 different occasions, in 4 different speeches, that his commitment to the national minimum wage is absolute. So I think we'd better just stop this load of mischief-making nonsense. The Labour Party is going to introduce a national minimum wage when it is in government. Just get it clear and let's move on to other issues.
But Mr. Edmonds, there is a bit of an issue because when we say to you, should there be a level set on the minimum wage in the manifesto, you say yes. And when you say to Gordon Brown, should there be a level set on the minimum wage, he says that is to be decided.
What we have to decide is how the minimum wage is to be implemented, and we're going to decide that in the next year. Gordon Brown has said to me straightforwardly, face to face, that we must, of course, work out the implementation and we must declare the level before the next election. I really don't know what all this mischief-making nonsense is about. We seem to be picking over each word. In the end, it's a matter of trust. And the party leader, Tony Blair, has said it in clear and unambiguous terms. We are going to have a national minimum wage, and we know what the formula is. Let's move on to important issues like full employment. No full employment, the national minimum wage will mean nothing. Full employment, we need some targets for that.
You need targets for that on full employment, and you need a target figure for a minimum wage.
And that's what we're going to set in the next year by fixing, through the Economic Policy Commission, how both are going to be implemented.
Jon Edwards, we'll move on to those important things in the hall. Sheena.
John, thank you. The debate on economic policy continues with the motion on the Child Support Act. Let's have a look at that composite. It's composite number 9. It comes from the Society of Labour Lawyers. They're looking for a wholesale review of the Child Support Act, and they want an appeal system to rule on what it calls manifestly unfair decisions by the Child Support Agency, legal representation for parents who'd otherwise not be able to afford it, and clean break settlements to be taken into account when the Child Support Agency is assessing maintenance. It's got the backing of the NEC, and it's being moved by James Taylor.
Failing is crystal clear. It's failing on whatever basis that you look at it. But most of all, it's failing those that the Tories claimed it would help. It's failing the children of lone parents. They are not better off. They are, in fact, in many cases, worse off. The parents of those children often are suffering great financial hardship. The parents that have the care of the children, in most cases mothers, have often found that their benefits have been cut when they're not prepared to deal with the agency and give the identity of the fathers of their children. In many cases, because they have real fears that they'll be subject to violence if they do that. Many parents that are absent have suffered severe hardship when the inflexible formula applied to them means that they simply do not have enough money to continue their relationship with their children, and in some cases even to travel to visit those children. The financial hardship has put children and families under great strain. The party that claims to be the party of the family has shown it to be the party of family breakdown. Those failings are in a number of areas. The agency is slow to make its assessments. It doesn't make orders in the meantime, allowing children and their parents to receive finance. As a result of that, many lone parents have ended up in serious debt, and many absent parents have ended up with a bill at some later stage they simply are not in a position to afford to pay. Similarly, once an assessment has been made, the agency is often slow to put right the arrears that have accrued. In one case, arrears of over £1,000 would be paid off at under £2.50 a week. That meant that the mother that was supporting that particular child would have to wait 8 years until the arrears had been paid off. I'm sure that that was a matter that helped her bank manager in dealing with her debt to know that in 8 years' time she'll be in a position to repay it. The agency is slow in passing the money that it collects to lone parents. It cannot deal with the self-employed, and it is harsh and insensitive in the way that it deals with mothers. It ignores past arrangements between parents. It fails to deal with what's known as clean breaks, whereby parents made financial agreements at the time of their divorce, which now are entirely ignored by the agency. The formula that it operates is inflexible, and many families have ended up worse off now than they were before they received maintenance from the child support agency. Appeals can only be brought on application of the formula. There is no provision for unfair decisions to be dealt with, and often there is only representation on one side in those appeals, not on the other, as legal aid or legal assistance is not available. But is this an example of complex legislation that is taking a long time to implement, or is it a case of a deliberate decision by the Conservative government to disregard the rights and the interests of parents? I suggest that it is the later. The Tory government were warned repeatedly of the hardship that would be caused by this legislation at the time of its implementation. Yet despite that, they went on to implement it, taking no account of the recommendations that had been given. What has happened is that there is now provision where there is less help for children and less help for their parents. In dealing with that, many people think that there must be a repeal of the Child Support Act. I suggest that that's wrong. The Labour Party has to take account of the fact that parents have responsibility for their own children. It cannot be the party that simply says that the state will always pay. However, what the Labour Party must do is have a compassionate heart and a hard head. It must make sure that parents who can afford to pay do pay, but those that can't afford to pay and who are suffering genuine hardship are helped out and their special needs taken into account. The fact is that the Tory government has done little for parents in any regard during its period in power. And what is necessary is that we move forward to new child support legislation which will help those that really need help, and that is the children of lone parents. And for that reason, I urge you to support this motion. I'm grateful.
James Taylor moving Composite 9 there, which calls for a wholesale review of the operation of the child support agencies. 7 motions were submitted on the child support legislation of 1991. 5 of them called for the repeal or abolition of the Act. But the Composite goes for a wholesale review. Here's Angus Davis seconding the Composite.
I come to this rostrum to second this Composite number 9, protesting about this Act and pointing out that unnecessary hardship have been imposed on mothers, former partners and all the children involved. The implementation of this Act, like all the Tory legislation, has shown up the total hypocrisy of this government. This Act, which supposedly supports children, has only benefited the Treasury. The motion as moved encompasses most of the changes required from the next Labour government. The agency have set questions. What questions they are, which demand replies from women. They encroach on civil liberties. They are questions of an extremely confidential nature about the details of physical relationships. Replies are demanded. Result is that women who have had violent relationships and are still frightened and vulnerable from the past experiences are now in a continuing position of being frightened that their ex-partner will find them. We in the Labour Party have always supported anything that protects women in violence. We have supported housing benefit, we've supported the Housing Commission, we've supported everything that protects women when they come into a violent relationship. The more we examine this Act, however, we see how it hurts the couples who wish to end unhappy partnership as they attempt to form an amicable settlement. But the Act, by its very nature, has caused controversy. Fathers who try to maintain family ties with children from a previous partnership are being financially punished. We as a party approve of parents helping to maintain their children and will continue to do so. To our trade union colleagues who I understand haven't been too happy about some trade unions haven't been happy about some aspects of the Act, we hope that a Labour government will be part of a movement which will continue to benefit all of humanity, working together to protect our children. Support this motion as we move into the 20th century. Let us forget that hackneyed expression, Victorian values. Let's move forward. We in Scotland, as we move into the establishment of a Scottish Parliament after the next election, immediately after, hope that we can protect the people from iniquitous legislation that has been put into being by a party which is practically unknown north of the border. I hope you will support this composite.
Agnes Davis from Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley constituency Labour Party seconding this composite, and around the country MPs have said that this subject, the Child Support Act, the Child Support legislation, is one of the biggest issues they have to deal with in the surgeries week by week. Now there's time for some open debate. In the chair, Gordon Collings, looking for speakers who want to contribute to what has been a very contentious issue, not just at political party level, but obviously where it hits at domestic level throughout the country.
Chair, I have a problem with this motion. Not that I don't support it, but I really do feel it doesn't go far enough. What we actually need is to have the Child Support Act abolished, and that's what we should be fighting for.
Now, 5 of the 7 motions submitted did call for abolition.
I do accept everything that's been said by the mover and the seconder, but I don't think that this Act is subject to reform. It is very much like the poll tax. There's only one way to deal with it: get rid of it.
Very forthright contribution, and certainly reflecting the spirit of the motions that were submitted.
Comrades, can you remember to give your name and organisation when you begin to speak?
Jackie Ingley, GMB, Conference Chair. I'm supporting Composite 9. Most lone parents live in poverty. This country has never had a system to ensure lone parents receive adequate child maintenance or benefits. Under the old court system, judges, usually middle-class men, decided how much money lone parents, usually women, received to support a child. Only 1 in 3 received any child maintenance, and most of them only got a few pounds a month. We need a fair and responsive Child Support Act, and look at what we got. The shambles being administered by the Child Support Agency. I ask, what child has this Act supported? The Child Support Agency puts financial targets before the welfare of children. It increases women's dependency on men and causes more families to live in poverty. It ignores personal circumstances. It overturns long-standing mutual agreements. It doesn't protect women living in fear of violence. It targets parents who already help to support their children. And most of the money collected has gone, not to the lone parent family, but to the Treasury. We have all seen the news reports about the way people are being driven to desperation. The agency is setting families against one another, breaking down harmonious relationships and opening old wounds. Its priorities and targets are set by the government, and to this government, financial targets come well ahead of the welfare of children. Where do we go from here? The pressure must be taken off second families. All parents must be treated as individuals and have their personal circumstances taken into account. And there must be a full right of appeal. Conference, there must be an urgent review of the activities of the Child Support Agency and fundamental reform of the Child Support Act to make it carry its name, support children and not the Treasury.
Jackie Ingley speaking with passion, and there's Joan Lester, shadow spokesperson for the children, children and the family, giving no reaction to that. George Robertson beside her, shadow Scottish secretary. No more speakers, so we move on to Composite 10, which deals with rights at work. Let's have a look at that. It's in the name of the Communications Workers Union. It includes calls for a statutory national minimum wage, the right of employees to union membership, and equal rights for parents who work. That would include paternity leave and equal rights to take time off to care for children. But before we discuss that, a point of order has been accepted by the chair.
And to call two union delegates to and totally ignore CLP's wishes is an absolute disgrace.
And the delegates are very supportive of that complaint against the arrangements.
The secretary from the CLP, I did take two union speakers, that's true, but I don't know how you achieve a better balance than that in the short time that we had available. I would have had to take a lot more speakers, and if we'd done that, I dare say those who have got motions further down this agenda would have been looking for injury time. Now, I really must move on if we're to complete the business today, and therefore I call on the UCW to move Composite 10 on rights of work.
So Alan Johnson, General Secretary of the UCW, moves Composite 10 on workers' rights.
Only in Britain under the Tories could we watch the unedifying spectacle of a government systematically engaged in making the population as dispirited at work as they've made them despondent at home. People at work are no longer described in this country as personnel or even as employees, in a phrase which captures perfectly the warmth and compassion that the government has brought to British industrial relations. They are now a human resource. Whereas Labour understands that the economy is a tool of society, this government continues to believe that society is a tool of the economy, and they've succeeded in damaging both. According to estimates from the US Department of Labour, UK hourly rates are 18% lower than in France, 30% lower than in Holland, and 42% lower than in Germany. Pension, redundancy, and sickness benefits are also substantially lower. Britain now accounts for half of all the people in Europe required to work over 48 hours a week. We're the only European Union country that sets neither a maximum working week nor a minimum holiday requirement. And yet we suffer consistently high levels of unemployment and a record on economic growth over the past 15 years that's the worst of any OECD country since the war. But the government has united the workforce in one respect. Lowly paid workers on short-term contracts are supervised by beleaguered managers who are inconsistently rewarded through performance-based pay. The demoralisation and resentment is shared north and south and has hit middle class as well as working class households. That's why the speech that John Smith made to last year's TUC was not just indicative of his passionate commitment to social justice, it was also politically astute. The British people are tired of having this country, once the workshop of the world, portrayed as the sweatshop of Europe. And they recognise that ever more spiteful and vindictive attacks on trade unions have heralded increasingly repressive measures against their members. And so a Charter of Rights for people at work is essential, as part of Labour's overall commitment to revive and enhance the democratic process. Trade union legislation such as that which allows union members to be paid less than non-union members has to go, not because it's unpopular with trade unions, but because it's an abuse of civil rights. And already, in the light of the signal workers' dispute, fresh legislation is being contemplated, the nature of which demonstrates the government's natural inclination towards the despotic. If we were to add any fresh clauses to the list contained in this composite, it wouldn't be about refresher ballots or strikes in essential services being banned. In the light of the signal workers' dispute, we would add a right that workers engaged in industrial disputes are able to express their views to the media without fear of dismissal. And so we have to champion progressive rights where the government contemplates even more repressive legislation. And the party in government must move quickly to apply a minimum wage at a time when the Tories' policy is towards a minimal wage. It's 25 years since Barbara Castle published an inquiry into a national minimum wage, which concluded by stating that a national minimum wage would be a useful tool for achieving social justice by providing more comprehensive protection against exploitation that exists at present. End quotes. A quarter of a century later, many people in this country, observing the antics of the directors of privatised utilities, are beginning to think that there should also be a maximum wage. This composite provides the basis for a policy that will unite the British people. The movement must bring new hope to people at work. The shallow newspeak of human resource management, which dominates our workplaces, cannot work when the redundancy notices are pinned up next to the company's mission statement. The British people deserve the genuine empowerment that Labour will provide through the policies set out in this composite. I move Composite 10.
Alan Johnson, General Secretary of the Communications Workers Union, moving Composite 10 on employers' rights and saying we must move quickly to a minimum as opposed to a minimal wage, as he put it. It's a very full basket of employers' rights here. And Margaret Prosser of the T&G will probably outline other areas of it, seconding the composite.
Conference, let me start by ensuring that there's no misunderstanding. My union is not looking for a return to the 1970s. We want to move into the future with a new legislative framework which will give working people the quality of life that they deserve. Composite 10 demonstrates the close relationship between economic issues, industrial issues, and social justice. For example, a statutory minimum wage not only reduces the misery of the new working poor, but it would also mean less reliance on benefits, and it would boost demand in the economy. A second example, equal rights and protection for both full-time and part-time workers will mean that part-time work won't be characterised by low pay and insecurity. This is a very important issue. It's been predicted that by the turn of the century, almost half of all jobs could be part-time. If we don't give part-timers equal employment protection, many workers will continue to be mistreated, with flexibility remaining an advantage to the employer with no corresponding advantage to the worker. And there's the most recent example of Portillo's response to the right to paternity leave. Full-time male workers in this country work longer hours than anyone else in the European Union. How come the rest of Europe can give workers adequate protection at work, and yet it's so impossible in the United Kingdom? However, Conference, the key to all these issues is the right to collective bargaining. Legislation must provide an effective framework for collective bargaining to take place, underpinned by the fundamental right to union representation. Conference, the last 15 years have produced a litany of trade union members who have been the victims of Tory laws. GCHQ workers, Timex, dockers, miners, printers and seafarers. Even those covered by the limited protection of the wages councils have seen that protection taken away. And the well-organised workplaces have been under attack. The oil industry has intimidated its members.
And Margaret
paying
Prosser
workers to give up
seconding this
trade union
composite
rights.
on
The
employers' rights.
alternative is
We'll be back to continue this economic debate on the first day of the Labour Party conference, but we go to London now and the newsroom and Maura Stewart.
Good afternoon. On the first day of the Labour Party's annual conference in Blackpool, the Shadow Chancellor, Gordon Brown, has reaffirmed the party's commitment to a national minimum wage. But to the annoyance of some unions, the party leadership has refused to say how much it might be.
With party leaders stressing that middle-income earners won't pay more tax under Labour, the Shadow Chancellor promised voters fair taxation and moved to reassure critics that the party remains committed to one key policy.
The Labour government will not only introduce a national minimum wage, but we will set it at a level that for the first time in our history brings decency and dignity to every man and woman in the workplace.
But the party leader is likely to anger some unions tonight when he hints that a minimum wage might not be introduced as soon as Labour took office.
However, like any decent policy, it has to be sensibly introduced. If it is, it will work. If it isn't, it'll cause problems. Now, that is a message to my own party as well as to the public.
And it's a message that could cause Mr Blair more problems in Blackpool this week.
Buckingham Palace has described a book about the Princess of Wales and a former army officer as grubby and worthless. The book claims to give details about the relationship between the princess and the former lifeguards officer, James Hewitt.
The book that has catapulted the princess back into the headlines arrived in the shops this morning after a weekend of intense speculation about its contents. Written in the style of a romantic novel, it purports to be an account of a 3-year affair the princess is alleged to have had with a former cavalry officer, James Hewitt. It claims an affair began at Kensington Palace at a time when the princess's marriage was failing, and that they regularly shared long weekends together at the Prince and Princess's country home, Highgrove. This morning, she continued her normal routine, visiting her London health club, but she's said to be distressed by the allegations. She has taken legal advice, but it's thought unlikely that she'll sue.
West Yorkshire Police are questioning a man and 4 teenagers about a suspected arson attack in which 2 baby boys were badly burned. Billy Cunningham, who's 6 months old, and his 19-month-old brother, Jim, are critically ill in hospital. Police believe this was the 3rd arson attack on their home in a week. Police in Sunderland say that 3 teenagers found dead in the space of 4 months were victims of a serial killer. All 3 bodies were found within the same area, each after a fire. Originally, the police thought the deaths were caused by solvent abuse, but now say the boys were strangled. More news at 10 to 4.
Good afternoon. The short, cold snap of weather is beginning to take hold across the country. It's already feeling really very cold across northern areas, still into double figures in some southern regions, but here too those temperatures will continue to fall throughout the remainder of the afternoon. Cloud and rain across East Anglia through the Midlands, moving down through the southeastern regions, bright with only 1 or 2 showers in the west, rather more showery weather following on into the east with hail, sleet and snow, especially over the hills up in Scotland. That will keep going tonight, but large areas clear, cold and frosty for this coming night. As for tomorrow, a rather chilly day, a lot of fine, bright weather around, the showers clearing away in towards the North Sea, but still rather cloudier conditions continuing to move in across Scotland, bringing a little drizzle, rain and sleet. Bye-bye.
First-time directors get their first break on 10 by 10. We look at how 10 by 10 has launched the careers of dozens of young filmmakers. And this year, 10 by 10 brings you some of its most innovative directing debuts yet. That was my film. 10 by 10 starts tonight, 8:40, BBC Two.
Behind the scenes of Gone with the Wind, the Birds and Treasure Island, movie magic on BBC One now. Here on BBC Two, we return to the Winter Gardens, Blackpool.
Welcome back to Blackpool. Well, the all-day debate on the economy moves on. They've gone on to rights at work, and the party leadership, I should say, has moved on pretty quickly to try to sort out some perceived confusion about the national minimum wage policy. Earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Chancellor, Gordon Brown. He refused to say whether Labour would specify a figure for the minimum wage before the next election, but he's denied any splits on the issue. Mr. Brown said on this programme, "I don't think you would announce a figure until you had done the detailed work." And he went on, "We will put these matters to the Economic Commission and they will decide what comes to the party conference." More on that a bit later. Rights at work, parental rights, under discussion at the moment. Let's join the debate.
We must express our policy for a national minimum wage.
And this is Garfield Davis, Asda General Secretary, moving a composite on the minimum wage in particular, which of course is the issue which has dominated conference today.
Workers will be able to clearly see the way their wages will be improved. Comrades, the national minimum wage is fair, just and economically efficient. John Smith said it all when he stated, "There are things we do above all because they are right. The national minimum wage is right. I urge this conference to unite totally and support Composite 11. Thank you."
So Garfield Davis being applauded by conference and speaking passionately for commitment to a national minimum wage in principle and the hourly rate of pay being actively promoted and publicised. Let's just have a look at the detail of that composite. It's proposed by the Shopworkers Union. And as I say, it's mainly concerned with the minimum wage, and it does have the executive support. It wants commitment to a national minimum wage in principle, the hourly rate of pay that's fixed for it, and for it to be actively promoted and publicised before the next election. The motion says it should be introduced by a Labour government as early as possible, but it stops short of setting a figure.
Economic and social problems that exist in this
Seconding the motion now from Davy Hume, constituency Labour Party, David Acton.
Because as we all recognise, mass unemployment drives wages down and it destroys working conditions of millions of people in this country. And we need to get people back to work, and we need to ensure that when people are in work, they are paid a fair wage for a fair day's work. That is essential for a strong economy, and that is our agenda. The Tories will not wear this at all as their agenda. Of course, the Conservatives will tell us, and will continue to tell us, that a minimum wage will create more unemployment. Well, I reject that argument, and we need to argue away from this conference that it's low pay that creates unemployment. People who are on low pay cannot afford to buy the goods that other people are producing, and this becomes a vicious circle of decline, and we have to break that vicious circle, and we have to get people back to work with a minimum wage. And we have to ask ourselves, who are these people who are saying that we can't afford to pay a minimum wage? Well, we know who they are, don't we? They're the very same people who are receiving vast incomes from an exploited workforce, and they are government ministers who are paid something like £50,000 or £60,000 a year without their directorships. I would like to see them try to live on £2 or £2.50 an hour. They wouldn't last 2 weeks, I can tell you, and the minimum wage would be at the top of their agenda, never mind. The Tories don't recognise the worth of working people. That's why they abolished the wage councils. They will never recognise the worth of working people. What they should recognise, and what we in the Labour Party recognise, and what we believe, is that the real wealth of any society is in its people. You don't get the best out of people if you pay them low wages, and you can't then build a strong economy on the backs of the low-paid workers. It doesn't work, and it never will. We have to get people back to work, and we have to introduce a minimum wage. Then we will see a strong economy, and then, most importantly, we'll give hope back to the people. Thank you.
And David Acton seconding the motion there on the minimum wage. Now, of course, It
Thank
was
you. I call
moved by Asador
Composite
Garfield
12 to be
moved
moved
it,
by the
and in the
NCU
original
clerical,
motion
seconded
put
by
forward by
Sutton and
Asador,
James CLP.
there was a clause to specify clearly and publicly at every opportunity the hourly rate of pay, currently around £4 an hour, which the formula would produce. That, of course, is not in this composite. Speaking now.
Chair, Conference. Jeannie
Drake from the National Communications Workers
moving
Union.
Composite 12. This motion looks to the future and not to the past. Restoring full employment is the key goal of a future Labour government. There are over 2.6 million people registered unemployed today, but probably another 5 to 6 million live in the fear of the prospect of unemployment. That fear has a debilitating effect, removes people's sense of worth, and leaves them feeling exposed, vulnerable members of society. Our policies for full employment have to recognise that they must be for a different kind of workforce, a different kind of worker, a different kind of business. They must offer people of all ages opportunities to develop their skills and make the most of their potential. They must equip people with the skills and abilities to be able to move to new, different, better jobs. We are a long way from that kind of full employment, and we are getting further from it. We have a body of employers, aided and abetted by the government, who are casualising the workforce to cut costs and reduce their economic and social responsibilities to employees, but who are also failing to provide the training and the retraining needed to help people move from job to job and skill-based to skill-based. This motion identifies key policy areas for protecting today's workforce and building a better future for tomorrow's. I will concentrate on highlighting three. First, the motion calls for innovative thinking to find alternatives to redundancies in companies that face short-term difficulties. Ways of enabling companies to use a short-term surplus of labour to invest in the future, rather than dumping workers on the dole queue. This government has led the country into recession, with the consequential appalling effects on employment opportunities. The Labour government will have to pick up those consequences, which means it must develop tax and employment initiatives to minimise the effect on people's jobs and maximise the country's ability to succeed when business picks up once more. Second, there must be initiatives to help redundant workers find new job opportunities that make full use of their existing skills or provide the training to allow them to acquire new skills. The government has allowed employers to dump millions of people onto the dole queue and then done nothing but complain about the level of payments to those who, through no fault of their own, are unable to secure a working wage. The taxpayer has picked up the total responsibility, and employers have been relieved of any burden. In fact, some companies have been able to make record profits without being obliged to carry any responsibility for the shedding of thousands of employees onto the dole queue. Rather, they have given obscenely high pay rises to their directors to encourage them to keep up the good work. Third, the motion calls for new ways of promoting partnership between employers and employees to ensure the success and survival of their firms. Of course, employers and employees can contest the ground between them, have different interests in the workplace, different views about how the profits of success should be divided. But employers and employees also have interests in common and responsibilities and obligations to each other. Neither benefits if their firm fails, both lose. We need to find ways of making that common interest into a more effective partnership for jobs, in the interests of both parties in the industry and in the country as a whole. Conference, a Labour policy along these lines would give confidence and hope to millions of people who are unemployed, living in the fear of unemployment and fear for their children's unemployment. I believe this search for hope and a better future is the issue upon which Labour's victory at the next general election will stand or fall. Conference, I commend Proposition 12 to you.
Jeannie Drake of the National Communications Workers seconding Composite 12, one of 4 motions under the Rights at Work general heading, concentrating on training opportunities, and this one is supported by the Executive. It proposes there should be a universal right to vocational education and training and reformed entry qualifications to help manual workers get non-manual jobs.
If we are to move towards restoration of the concept of full
And Arthur
employment,
Scargill will be moving the next motion. We'll be hearing from him shortly.
Has a central role in any strategy.
Speaking now, Gail Montgomery, who is seconding Composite 12.
High productivity economy, Britain must invest in an industry and technology. But that investment will be wasted without the investment in skills to ensure that the whole workforce is able to challenge the best of international competition. Training must be effective and relevant, and the providers of training must be accountable. The quangos, the techs and the lecs, which have been entrusted with training, fail to deliver on accountability and effectiveness. National and Scottish vocational qualifications, with the active involvement of the trade unions and industry, can form a foundation for training policies, but whilst SVQs and NVQs address current skills deficiencies, the next Labour government must move beyond today and yesterday and address the skills we need for tomorrow. An important part of this approach will be to ensure that school leavers are properly equipped to take their place in the workforce. We must look to retraining those who have lost their jobs, either as old industries decline or the many more who have been flung on the scrap heap as a direct result of Tory mismanagement of the economy. We must not, however, forget Thatcher's children who have left school, poorly educated, their potential ignored, unemployed, or perhaps worse, exploited within low-paid employment. These must be included in our vision of a new Britain. Training to establish Britain as a high-tech, high-skilled economy must form a vital part of Labour's plans for recovery. In 1964, Harold Wilson talked of the white heat of technology. His response to this challenge was the Open University, the bedrock of open learning. Today, only Labour has the vision to meet the white heat challenge of the 1990s. The programme outlined within this motion and the proposal for University of Industry provides the framework we should adopt to embark on recovery. Comrades, I urge you to support Composite 12.
Gail Montgomery, Sutton and Cheam constituency parties seconding Composite 12. So we move on to Composite 13.
Thank you. I call Composite 13 to be moved by the National Union of Mine Workers and seconded by Harbour CLP.
Arthur Scargill getting a cheer, and Composite 13, we'll look at the detail in a moment, but it's asking Conference to sweep away most of the government's trade union reforms.
Arthur Scargill, modernising National Union of Mine Workers member, moving Composite 13. When I last moved a resolution of this kind some 3 weeks ago, I was accused of preaching that old-time religion, and I pleaded guilty. I'm here again today to preach that old-time socialist religion. If it was good enough for Keir Hardie, it's good enough for me. And let me tell you this, we can have all the nice decor, all the beautiful greenery in the world, but we need policies, and we need hope, we need faith, and we need commitment. Over the past 15 years, we have been systematically attacked by Tory legislation. 8 separate segments, all designed to destroy effective trade unionism. These have produced a legal minefield for trade unions and for trade unionists, with union leaders consulting lawyers rather than their members before taking steps to defend workers' rights. There's been a certain degree of hypocrisy about our party, which regularly salutes the Tolpuddle martyrs and the suffragettes and Nelson Mandela, and we've done it again today. Has it escaped your understanding? They all defied unjust, unfair law, and they fought against it and fought to change it. Chairman, for a number of years, the Tories, as everyone in this hall knows, introduced mass unemployment on the one hand and repressive anti-trade union laws on the other. Classic weapons of capitalism designed to destroy effective trade unionism. But in the past decade, our party has apparently abandoned its commitment to its class in a vain belief that it would bring electoral success. The results are there for all to see. It certainly has not brought electoral success. It's brought more electoral defeats. Compare the reticence of the leadership of the party in the recent signal workers RMT dispute, where there was an abject failure on the part of the leadership to support signal workers, with the Tory government's outright support for those who broke the Sunday trading laws. There is a class difference and there's a class approach to these questions. We saw during the RMT dispute secondary action, where the employers used people who had retired, where they brought workers in from the outside. Secondary action against workers, and no one raised a voice of protest. What's wrong with our party? What's wrong with our movement declaring that it's right and in line with the United Nations Charter that workers should also be entitled to take supportive action? What's wrong with the commitment that when nurses or those least able to help themselves are in dispute, other workers are entitled to come to their aid and give total, unequivocal support? Chairman, we should all learn the lessons of history. We should all remember that we merely haven't come to Blackpool for the rock. We've come for the rock of socialist ages. We've come to recognise, I hope, the real lessons of history. And as recently as the Pentonville Five, it was not the official solicitor that freed them. It was the mass action of working people, men and women, who refused to accept an unjust and unfair law. And recently we saw, in the mid-80s, a young barrister recognising the dangers of merely accepting the laws. And he warned about the Pryor and the Tebbit bills, and he said that we should, in fact, repeal them. Tony Blair was right then, and he's wrong now when he seeks to retain part of the Tory legislation that's been put on the books to challenge working class rights. Chairman, don't be afraid of your working class background. Don't be afraid of our commitment to our class. Throughout history, we've always given unswerving commitment, from the time when Keir Hardie supported the Featherstone miners who were shot down by the Staffordshire Regiment, to the days in 1972 and 74 when Harold Wilson and the Labour Party supported our industry and our union in its fight against unjust legislation. As a result of their commitment and unswerving devotion, they were elected the government of the day. I ask you, recognise that we have an opportunity not merely to repeal, but in the meantime to oppose and to defy those laws which take away the rights of individuals and the rights of trade unions. I ask you to support our motion.
Well, you saw it and you heard it. A great cheer for Arthur Scargill. Not a stage-managed performance, that one. Not all union leaders are on side with the leadership, and there we heard an unabashed attack on what he called the abject failure of the leadership to take a stand on the signal workers' strike. An attack on Tony Blair personally for changing his mind on trade union reforms, all in the cause of a composite motion asking to sweep away the trade union reforms, which is actually opposed by the National Executive. Conference has woken up inside the hall. Let's see what's happening outside. John.
Yes, and it looked like John Prescott was well amused by that speech. I'm joined now by Barrie Clement, the Labour editor of The Independent, and Kevin Maguire, the industrial editor of the Daily Mirror. We've heard some of the unions saying that they're happy, there is no problem. We've heard Bill Morris saying that he's got no problems. We've heard John Edmonds similarly saying that. Is that true?
No, it's not. It's certainly not true as far as the national minimum wage is concerned. Certainly Bill Morris is very keen to have a definite formula for the national minimum wage, and clearly Tony Blair isn't. And I think that is a source of friction between the two people. There's no question about that.
I mean, they tried to keep a lid on this at the start of the week. They thought they'd sorted out the minimum wage. They wouldn't talk about a level of it, and that would be the end of it.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be like that. I mean, the Transport and General Workers Union members are among the lowest paid in the country. Bill Morris is keen to promote their interests. And I think he suspects, or certainly some people in the union movement suspect, that it's not just a question of ditching the formula, it's a question of ditching the policy, and they want to ensure that it doesn't go any further than just ditching that particular formula.
Kevin Maguire, is that right, that it's almost not what Tony Blair has done now, but what he might do next?
I think union leaders are concerned on two grounds. One is culturally, they like to tie Labour leaders to firm policies. And secondly, they're concerned that once he's in government, he'll introduce a minimum wage at such a low level, it'll have a very low impact.
So, in other words, almost what they did in the States?
Correct. In the States, there is a minimum wage, but it's so low, it doesn't really benefit that many people. They want a minimum wage of at least £4.05 an hour, which would benefit 4 million or more, all of their members.
Do you suspect that Tony Blair, who after all was the person who fought at the last general election that the minimum wage should be set at £3.40, realises now that maybe it was a vote loser and that perhaps they shouldn't have a level set on it?
Well, I think there's no doubt about Tony Blair's personal commitment to a minimum wage, but what is in doubt is the level at which it will be introduced. He doesn't want a level set now, first of all because it will be out of date. Secondly, it will give the Tories an easy target to hit at. And thirdly, I don't think he really knows what it will be.
Barrie, do you sense that what we heard today from the unions was the sort of the roar of a toothless tiger, or do they still have teeth? Do they still have the power to stop Tony Blair in his tracks?
Well, they certainly have the power to embarrass Tony Blair if they want to. They certainly have the block vote, as we've seen today and as has been said yesterday. And they will have the power to actually embarrass Tony Blair. There's no question about that. And they will be digging in there and insisting on the formula. And they say that a resolution to go before the conference anyway actually commits the party to a formula, and they will insist that the formula still pertains. However, I think Tony Blair will get his way.
Kevin, do you sense that Blair has got a party management problem over this?
I think it's going to come back and irritate him several times before the general election. Union leaders are in a bit of a bind here. They don't want to rock the boat, but they also want to make sure they get concessions and get policies from him. They can cause great irritation, and they will unless they get private commitments.
And will Blair be in a position to say to them, look, you embarrass me, but actually I'm going to win, because it almost does him good in terms of the general public to be seen to be facing down the union?
Well, bashing union barons is still a vote-winning sport, and secondly, at the end of the day, no manifesto commitment will be in there that he doesn't agree with.
Kevin Maguire, Barrie Clement, Huw.
John, the debate on employment rights continues. At the moment, we have Nick Holden from Harborough Constituency Labour Party, who's seconding Composite 13.
The democratic rights of ordinary working people to stand up for themselves and their families. As Arthur Scargill has said, under the Tory laws, British Rail are allowed to organise secondary action in support of their colleagues in Railtrack without giving notice, without warning the strikers, and without getting permission.
Can you find an end, colleague?
All we are saying is that under Labour Party laws, working people should be allowed to do the same. I urge you, conference, support Composite 13. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nick Holden, heartily applauded by Arthur Scargill.
Now
Seconding number 13, which the NEC in fact opposes. They're now moving on to Resolution 172, which is an additional resolution which calls upon the party to welcome the campaign by the USA to place on the agenda of the new World Trade Organization the concept of labour conditions. And moving that Resolution 172 is Helen McGrath. She's General President of the KFAT, the Knitwear and Footwear Union.
Helen McGrath, Knitwear, Footwear and Apparel Trades Union. Conference. In moving Resolution 172 and accepting the amendment, we are calling on the Labour Party to seek the inclusion of minimum labour standards based on ILO conventions, particularly those concerning child labour, the use of forced labour, equal rights, and the recognition of trade unions in all international trade and aid agreements. The issue of trade union rights have already been debated at length in relation to the UK, but it is even more imperative where international standards fall to meet even basic social rights. We need standards which allows collective bargaining to establish levels of income to enable families to be fed, housed and educated to acceptable standards within their own community. We record our concerns that aid and free trade do not automatically result in social and democratic progress in developing countries. Internationally, we are winning the argument that trade, aid and human and democratic trade union rights should be linked. However, the Tories continue to oppose international progress on trade being linked to protecting workers' rights and, in particular, abolishing child labour. Nobody really knows the number of children under 16 in full-time employment across the world. No UN agency has figures because governments seldom bother to count them. We rely on estimates, and the most commonly cited estimate ranges from 80 to 200 million. A few years ago, the ILO estimated that in China alone, there were 40 million working children aged between 10 and 14. In Asia, there are tens of millions of children, victims of a virtual slave trade taking place under the nose of sometimes indifferent and often powerless governments. My union, KFAT, is affiliated to our International Textile, Garment and Leather Workers Federation, and the General Secretary of this federation travels all over the world, assessing situations within the 100 affiliated countries in this federation, but in particular, the third world countries. I would like to quote just a few instances from a document he produced on child labour and some examples which he encountered on exploitation of children. One, he says, is 5 years old, yet she is a skilled worker. He talked to her at 9 p.m. in a carpet weaving shed in Kathmandu. She had started work at 7 a.m. that day, toiling amongst her sisters. Her mother, who was unemployed, brought drinks and some food daily. One worked 7 days a week. She is one of thousands of children weaving carpets in Nepal for the wealthy in Europe. In every weaving shed, there's 80 to 90% of the workers are children. Second instance is Patel. She is 9 years old and has worked for nearly a year in a garment factory exporting shirts to the United States. Work begins at 8 a.m. and finishes at 10 p.m. 2 or 3 times a week, Patel has to do the night shift. She stops work at 3 a.m., sleeps on the floor of the factory. Early morning, she goes home at 6 a.m. and returns to the factory on the outskirts of Dhaka 2 hours later. She is paid 35 cents for the night work. I have quoted exploitation of children internationally in the textile, clothing and footwear industries. This appalling exploitation exists in all other industries, including engineering, farming, shops, and many manufacturing industries. We must protect our young, our future. Shame on the owners whose greed deprives young people of their childhood. Shame on the buyers and retailers who ignore their plight. Shame on the consumers who unthinkingly buy the goods these children produce. And shame on trade unions and governments across the world if we don't raise our voice against this evil. I move.
Helen McGrath, appealing that in all international trade and aid agreements, there should be the inclusion of minimum labour standards based on ILO conventions, particularly those concerning child labour and the use of forced labour. That will now be seconded,
Chair,
this additional resolution by Peter Booth.
Transport and General Workers Union Textile Trade Group, sometimes known as the Dyers, Bleachers and Textile Workers. Chair, in seconding Resolution 172, where some of us felt that perhaps this was on the wrong part of the agenda, as it did deal with international workers' rights and could very easily have been dealt with under the development part of the agenda this week. However, there is a very important aspect and dimension of workers' rights in the international arena, and that's the aspect of the social clause and the linkage of workers' rights through the social clause to the international trade which takes place around the world. Now, some of us have been campaigning for over 20 years on the issue of the social clause and the need for a social dimension in trade and workers' rights. For most of those years, we've been ignored by governments around the world. We've certainly not been ignored by the workers in those sweatshop industries around the world, who unanimously support the need for the inclusion of a social clause in all international trade agreements. We'd like to claim some credit for the recognition through the United States and even now this year through the European Union in noting that there is a need in the new World Trade Organization for the inclusion of social rights, for a social dimension clause. We'd like to take that credit, but I don't feel we can. Because 30 years before that, in the formation of GATT itself in 1944, there was a clear objective where there should be a recognition of the linkage between the economic and social development of any country entering into international trade around the world, an economic and social development. Sadly, we've seen over 50 years massive, rampant international development on the economic side and financial side of world trade, but nothing or very little in terms of the social aspect of the benefit for where that world trade should really belong, with the workers of the countries who are producing those goods. Indeed, what we've seen is, whilst international finance and capital runs rampant around the world, the workers and their trade unions are facing a crisis now of competition. Unfettered so-called free trade forces are creating mass unemployment and havoc where workers are pressured into a downward spiral of unsecure employment, reduced or abolished labour standards and poverty pay. And that's why the linkage between trade and workers' rights in the form of a social development clause needs to be an integral part of all international trade agreements and arrangements. But colleagues, let me tell you that during the last week alone, when we thought that we had a success within Europe recognising the social dimension, I find out this morning that in the discussions in Brussels last week, where the European Commission have put forward for the very first time in the history of European negotiations the aspect of the social clause, they have now got an opposition. That opposition, I'm ashamed to say, is the British government. The Tory government are opposing that clause in the new arrangements which we are seeking within Europe on the generalised system of preferences. Generalised system of preferences meaning giving preferential treatment to imports from the poorest parts of the world. And we, the British government, the Tory government, are the pariahs of the world now in opposing not just workers' rights here in Britain, but workers' rights in the poverty-stricken countries anywhere and everywhere around the world. Please support this resolution. Thank you.
Peter Booth, National Secretary of the T&G Textile Group, reinforcing the calls for putting measures into international aid agreements that secure rights of children who are forced to work.
So you'll understand the number of speakers I'll get in will vary inversely according to the length of your speeches. So
we're now
can I
entering
ask
the
you to
open
be,
debate, which is when the chair can call whoever he likes. There have been complaints during the afternoon that not enough so-called ordinary delegates are being called, so he's now under pressure to actually pick a few people who aren't big figures, and it'll be interesting to see if he does address the concerns that were actually raised early this afternoon. The speakers approaching the podium.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, can I just point out that it's extremely noisy at the back for our colleagues. Thank you. Chair, Conference, Joyce Bosniak, speaking on behalf of Unison in support of Composite 12. If Britain is to become the high-skill, high-productivity economy that we all want to build, a coordinated strategy for training must be at its heart. Investment in the people of this country in education and skill training will be central in the new partnership to achieve sustained economic growth. Britain lacks a training culture from our schools and then throughout our working lives. This failure is a betrayal of the people of this country, and it's a failure that is becoming ever more clear in the developing global economy. If we are to have a thriving democracy with cultural wealth and economic health, we need a system of adult and continuing education and training which encourages an aware and educated population. To our shame and humiliation, we fall far behind countries such as Germany, France and Japan in the numbers of 16 to 18-year-olds who remain in education. Again, we have a lower proportion staying on after 18. And the amount spent by companies on training puts Britain at 19th out of 22 countries recently studied. Other countries recognise that investing in their people will promote their economic success. This government doesn't. Britain, under the Tories, has been going in the opposite direction, towards a low-skill, low-pay economy. It's clear there's no future in that if we want to remain a cohesive, decent society. When we talk about education and training, millions of people will switch off. They feel there's nothing in it for them. It's a measure of our past failure. Britain's education system still divides our young, making the majority feel failures. Skill training at work is often narrow and short-term, offering no real commitment to personal development, but are simply task-specific. We must tackle this alienation from training before many people will be able to take advantage of the opportunities that the information superhighways have to offer. Attempts are being made to make training feel relevant to the majority. My own Unison has established return-to-learn courses for many manual workers who want to develop their basic literacy skills, giving them the self-confidence to go on. Our Open College offers a chance to build on the work experience and skills that members already possess.
Ask the delegates to support
We now
your
want
views.
to see high-quality, flexible...
Ask the delegates to support your views. Your time's up.
Okay, sorry. One thing I will say is just watch out for the use of MVQ and the clear exploitation of a lot of our members within the health service. Please support.
Thank you very much.
That was in support of Composite 12,
I'll take a CLP delegate
which says
from
there should
over
be
here.
a universal right to vocational
One
education
right
and
at the
training
back.
and
Yep.
reformed entry qualifications to help manual workers to get non-manual jobs. I wonder whether we'll get somebody to support number 13, which is the one that Mr. Scargill was backing.
Anne Cloyd, member for the
Anne
Clement
Cloyd,
Valley,
I doubt whether she'll
Shadow
support that.
Employment Minister. I want to speak in support of justice for the remaining miners of Britain. When British Coal tried to force the miners of the Tower Colliery in the Clement Valley, in my constituency, into the final humiliation a few months ago to sign away one by one the future of the pit. We resolved at that time to continue to fight for the future of the industry in the Cynon Valley, to fight to save the last deep mine in South Wales, a fight that had been going on since 1992. We had rallies, delegations, petitions to no avail. And just before Easter, the lodge officials were called to a meeting with British Coal. They were told the pit had to close. Geological problems, we were told. The men knew that wasn't true. The next day, British Coal were forced to admit that the loss of markets was the true reason. But we all know that the markets had been rigged against coal. When I went down the pit at the request of the men, I said I was going down for as long as it took. And the only reason that I came up 27 hours later was because British Coal had put out a press release which promised that the pay of the miners would remain the same and that the pit would remain open. We thought that we had won. It was a very brief victory. Just 2 hours later, the lodge officials were called in and told that the weekly wage of every man at the pit would be cut, some as much as £60 a week. British Coal had lied, and not for the first time. Given that situation, the men had no option. They had already turned down their redundancy money. They couldn't afford also to take a cut in wages. And that brings me to the role of ministers in the government. Michael Heseltine and Tim Egger have practiced a massive deception on the miners, who were asked to improve their productivity and who broke all the records only to find that it didn't make a scrap of difference. Deception on the people of Britain, who were persuaded that their massive protest against pit closures in 1992 had worked, only to find that the only change was the time scale in which they were to be closed. The tragedy for Tower and many others is that if Labour had won the last election, we would have taken steps to end the rigging of the markets so that British Coal would have had a fair chance to compete. Thousands of jobs have gone in coal in my valley. There are now 40 men chasing every single job vacancy in that valley. And we've had no new jobs in their place, whatever the government's propaganda machine may say. We know about low pay, £1.25 an hour for a machine operative, £2 an hour for a driver, £2.75 an hour for a security guard, and you have to provide your own dog. The economic consequences of losing well-paid jobs are there for all to see. More than £10 million has gone out of the economy of my valley alone. There was no case to close Tower. It made a profit of £28 million in the past 3 years, and overall productivity had increased. But the market was rigged against them. But comrades, we are fighting back. The men have put their money, their redundancy money, into buying that pit back. And we ask the help of all the Labour movement and everybody in this hall today to give us a chance to buy the pit back and to show that there is a future for the coal industry in Britain today.
Harry Jago, Crosby constituency. Let me say at the beginning, colleagues, I'm not a member of the Arthur Scargill fan club, but look at Composite 13. Arthur has outlined, in effect, the social chapter in this composite. It is not, there is not a single sub-paragraph in it that a member in this hall should be disagreeing with. It is not a resolution. This is not a resolution. This is a definition of socialism. And it puzzles me why the NEC should oppose it, And I would like to know on what grounds it is opposed and which subparagraphs they do not agree with. Because in my eyes, it is something that we have come here to resolve. We've come here to make policy for the workers, for our supporters, for our voters, for our members, for the whole nation. And we should not be rejecting this composite. And I sincerely hope you'll have another look at it in detail, look at the subparagraphs. You will find that there's not a single thing in there that any one of you there should be. If you're here representing socialists, you should not be in the position of opposing. And I plead with you to support this composite and give the workers, the supporters of this country, the support.
Time for a quick catch-up with Joyce Gould, who knows, of course, the backwoods, the backwaters and the backstage of the Labour Party. Now, we've been told by Jon Edwards and Gordon Brown this afternoon that we are exaggerating the friction over the minimum wage, but that's not quite right if you listen to the speakers in the hall, is it?
Well, I think people feel very strongly about it, and I think there was, certainly before conference, some feel that there ought to be a figure put on it, but I think that the view certainly is that it ought to be part of the review that the committee that Gordon Brown has to look at the overall effect of the economy. There are trade union members on that committee. I'm sure they'll put their case very forcibly on that occasion.
Now, we've got a whole raft of votes to get through under the new procedures later on this afternoon. OMOF, which went through last year via squeak, is what governs this year's NEC elections, along with other changes, a greater representation of women. So does that make it harder to call who's going to get on this year?
Absolutely impossible to call, particularly in the constituency section, because that was done by one member vote directly to that individual member's home, and then it was returned nationally.
Any hints?
And quite honestly, no. I mean, it has been kept absolutely under wraps. And it's surprising, but it's usually you get leaks, but there aren't any.
Oh, but that's just the constituency section. What about the trade union section?
Well, the trade union section, there's all sorts of things thrown about, but no names being given.
That, isn't it?
The Arthur Scargill was mentioned, but I think it's more a rumour than a fact. But I mean, it's very, very difficult to judge.
Well, we're hoping to get the results within our programme time this afternoon, of course, to bring them to you. But right now we go over to London and the newsroom with Morris.
Back to Blackpool now on BBC Two and the Labour Party conference.
Welcome back to Blackpool. Earlier in the summer, the new leader Tony Blair told the Shadow Cabinet, "We will win by offering the country a clear alternative, in particular a clear economic alternative." But how clear it is, you may judge from the debate and the interviews you've seen today. Some of the most forthright comments have come from the floor. On the minimum wage, yes, there is a commitment, but what rate will it be at? When will it come in? Will it be brought in flexibly and sensitively? And if so, what does that mean? 2 years away from an election, that kind of clarity may seem like a rather slippery aspiration. We'll go back to the conference. Roger Lyons from MSF has been speaking. The economic debate continues, and later, of course, we'll get to those votes in the new voting system being used for the first time.
Collective bargaining, the right to speak out without fear where there is malpractice, fraud, or a failure of service. The right to be an employee in a democratic society and not a slave. Conference, we need a Labour government so we can modernise Britain, the economy, the distribution of wealth, our constitution, our democracy. But this motion on rights to work is about the crucial issue of democratising the institutions where so many spend their working lives. I hope that we don't just pass Composite 10, but we make it a crusading issue for the entire movement. I support.
Roger Lyons, the MSF, supporting Composite 10, which I'll just remind you very quickly, called for the minimum wage, rights of employees to union membership, and equal rights for parents who work, and that, of course, includes paternity leave, a controversial issue lately. The open debate on building a strong economy, subsection rights at work, continues.
I don't want to go backwards. I want to go forward to the 20th century, 21st century. I don't want to repeal all trade union legislation, because if you do that, you repeal the democracy within it. The fact that we can take part as members of trade unions in elections. That is democratic. That's what we stand for as a Labour Party. Arthur Scargill, I'm afraid, got it wrong in my view, and criticising our leader Tony Blair got it even further wrong. Where Tony Blair and the party stood with regards to the signal workers was, as far as I'm concerned, and many of my colleagues and comrades are concerned, was spot on. We supported them as we do other members. We supported them as we do other workers. It's the government I'm opposed to, not our own party. This government, since 1979, has put down union after union. Let's not fall in that trap. Let's support the party's Composite 10, and please don't support Composite 13. I'm going forward, not back to 79.
Donna Bryant, firm message. She's from Old Bexley and Sidcup. There will be a few more speakers in this debate on rights at work before we get to efficient public services.
David Nixon, Doncaster North CLP, ex-miner, proud to be a Labour member, proud to be a socialist. Dear Chair, dear comrades, back in 1979, within months of its election, Mrs Thatcher's government used a statutory instrument to withdraw the protection against dismissal of the many millions of our workforce who have not worked for the same employer continuously for more than 1 year. Subsequently, amended to 2 years. Yet this apparently minor change continues to be of profound significance to employees' protection. Every employee in the country is aware of the well-established employers' practice in so many industries of sacking staff in the week before their 2 years expires so as to deny them protection. In some industries, such as construction, most employees never achieve protection against unfair dismissal at any point in their working lives, moving as they do from one site to the next, from one employer to the next, interspersed with periods of self-employment and unemployment. It has also become common practice for employees to work on a contractual period which is renewed every 3 or 6 months. Taken from the report by the Department of Trade, 1985, entitled The Burdens of Trade, it states, the present 1 year period is too short for many small businesses and distorting decisions. It was part of the shrill propaganda of deregulation. The propaganda concealed the totality of the equation, namely that the burden lifted from the employer then falls onto the employee, sacked unfairly, unreasonably and unlawfully, but deprived of all redress. I consider that an employee on the acceptance of his employment protected under the Employee Protection Act should be from day one, and I could call for support of the Composite 13. Thank you, comrades.
David Nixon supporting the composite that Arthur Scargill himself supported, which says that employees should have the right to strike without fear of dismissal, no limit the number of peaceful pickets, secondary action should be allowed. There should be no legal action against unions or members who take part in an industrial dispute. Now, we'll move on to those votes slightly later this afternoon. We're now moving on to another subsection of the all-day debate on the strong economy, this time on efficient public services. And we are waiting for a representative of the Fire Brigades Union to come along. Let's just talk you then through the composite, which is composite number 15. Now, Composite 15 is moved by the Fire Brigades Union and it deals with public services. Among the proposals, it wants a Labour government to abolish compulsory competitive tendering and to keep council services in-house, and it calls for more funding for the emergency services and, not surprisingly, for the fire brigades. The Labour executive supports this motion. At the rostrum is Ken Cameron of the Fire Brigades Union, but there is going to be a point of order, I think, because unless I'm mistaken, that's Mr. Scargill.
It's very rare that I do this, but Arthur Scargill anyway. It's very rare that I do this, but could somebody give me guidance? I thought that this conference put forward resolutions, had a debate and took a vote. So far, we haven't had a vote. Now, I'm not too bothered about other delegations, that's a matter for them, but as far as we're concerned, could we ask that in the democratic tradition of this party that we have a vote on the motions that have been before this conference in the last hour and a half?
as I explained earlier, the votes are planned in about an hour's time.
Arthur, we will be taking votes on all of the matters before the conference, and we're taking them in one session as advised by the Standing Orders Committee. And of course, one of the reasons for that is we've got a new voting system should we come to card votes. And so it's now necessary for us to roll all those votes into one in order that we can adequately accommodate it. And therefore, I do intend to proceed with the agenda as approved earlier by the conference and as recommended by the Standing Orders Committee. Therefore, I will take Ken Cameron on Composite 15. Ken.
Thank you, Cabinet President. The FBU have been very generous in the support of the NUM. I hope Arthur hasn't taken my time. The comments, the Tories are telling us that the economy is on course for recovery and that all the economic indicators are favourable, when in fact in Britain today we see 1 in 3 of our children living below the poverty line. The poorest in our society have had their incomes cut by 17%, whilst, as has been said many times from this rostrum, the richest have had a 62% increase in their wages. And that doesn't indicate a successful economy to me. What in fact it does indicate is that a few are doing very well, but most are not, and many are barely existing. And certainly the 4 million people denied work by the Tories' policies don't think we're on the road to recovery. And conference, there must be no doubt that this party is committed to the goal of full employment, because unemployment is a moral disgrace, it's unjust, it's uncivilised, and it's our outrage at this wanton waste of human life that distinguishes us from the other political parties. And the cost of the misery of unemployment inflicts upon millions of our people, men, women and children, the loss of pride, the loss of self-esteem is immeasurable. But we can measure what it's cost the country to keep this vicious policy going. It's cost £280 billion since 1979. And conference, this composite is about supporting a strategy for investment in the public sector which would achieve 2 objectives: to begin to repair the social fabric of our society while simultaneously laying the basis for a healthy, strong economy. And I wouldn't compete for the title of Economist of the Year, but it doesn't take a genius to work out that if we had full employment, then there would be far less of a drain on the public purse. And members of my union, the Fire Brigade Union, see starkly the effects of the poverty which has spread like a disease throughout our land since 1979, peoples whose homes have been disconnected from basic amenities because of debts and who resort to open fires and candles for heating, cooking and lighting. And obviously this will get worse as the VAT and fuel begins to bite. And our members are desperately trying to keep a vital public service running despite insufficient funds, and we are not alone in that. We know it's a problem faced by other public sector workers inside of this hall. We know it causes calamities for millions of our citizens daily, those who want to provide public services and those who want to use them. And the fire service is understaffed. We see fire stations continually each week being closed. We see fire engines being taken off the run, and the government are literally playing with fire and playing with the public's lives. And conference, make no mistake, we still are a class-ridden society. And I put a simple question to the Tories. Why is it always our people who are blamed for causing inflation? Why is it always our people who have to tighten their belts when the economy hits the skids? Conference, public sector workers will no longer put up with having their wages held down while salaries at executive and director level are allowed to continue to spiral. And why should we, when chiefs in the newly privatised utilities in the National Health Service Trusts are taking home telephone number salaries? And the Chancellor has indicated that he expects public sector pay to be frozen until 1997. And Treasury officials, together with Tory right-wingers and the IMF, are saying that public spending must now be cut back even harder. And it was very interesting that on the day that the press told us of the IMF's insistence on further cuts in public expenditure, that two of the biggest fire authorities in this country, Merseyside and South Yorkshire, declared themselves bankrupt. And the government's overt interference in the dispute between Railtrack and RMT proved that they're determined to enforce an unfair public sector pay policy. And public sector workers, without whose efforts our society would be in a far worse state, are fed up, as I've said, with being the scapegoats for their economic incompetence. And they'll no longer put up with being treated as second-class citizens in the workplace, nor having to deliver inferior services which have deteriorated so much that at times the public are actually being put in danger. But not only is there a new mood of determination, as we've seen from the Railtrack dispute and conference among trade unions in the public sector, but there's also a greater appreciation amongst users of public services of the impossible task being set by a government who are squeezing personnel to breaking point, expecting them to try to provide services despite inadequate funding and without proper pay increases. So there can be no better time for the Labour Party to put our case to the general public to show that we are the party that put public interests before vested interests. And the American economist Jake Hagelbreath said, perhaps it's a sense of history that divides good economics from bad. And it's our party's proud history which enables us... I can't see a light coming in.
Give us a hand by finding us an end.
I'm hiding it, yes. Can I say that in supporting this composite Cabinet Chair, it makes a contribution towards economic growth, to achieving full employment and helping all of our citizens, and not just some of these citizens within our country. I move.
Ken Cameron of Proud Brigades Union, whose time wasn't used up too much by Mr Scargill. Next on, Jean Christie of Gravesham.
Carry on.
Chair, Conference, Jean Christie, Gravesham CLP to second Composite 15. It is a fact that if a voter's overriding priority is minimal taxation and maximum self-provision of services, they will vote Tory. And so they should, because that's what the Tory party stands for. If, on the other hand, the voter believes in fair taxation and good provision of public services, they should be able confidently to vote Labour. Conference, I believe that people care about their health service. They want more nurses. They want them fairly paid, of course, and they want less purchasing directors. They want more beds in the National Health Service hospital and less subsidies for private medicine. They want democratically controlled schools with more money spent on the children and less spent on bribes to opt out of the system. People want more money spent on local services, and they want less money going into the pockets of private contractors, with or without the ex-Tory minister on their board. People want public post offices, not just profitable post offices, and if we do have to have tax collectors, they should be accountable public servants and not employees of some multi-interest private company with access to that sort of confidential information. These are quality of life issues which we in the Labour Party should unequivocally say will stay in the public service and will be funded adequately. We should also make clear that we stand firmly opposed to the deregulation and contracting out bill. This bill is Michael Heseltine in his true colours. It seeks to deregulate in areas such as food hygiene, trading standards, fire protection and health and safety at work. All issues that we in the Labour movement have spent decades fighting for. This bill also contains the most anti-democratic clause since the 16th century. This clause, widely known as the Henry VIII clause, gives the government the powers to issue orders to amend primary legislation without proper parliamentary debate. Currently, this legislation is before the House of Lords. And I'm a bit embarrassed to say this, Conference, but it's never stopped me before, so I'll say it again. I think that this legislation is more likely to be amended in the Lords than in the Commons. The Labour Party must continue to oppose this bill and, if necessary, necessary, the next Labour government must repeal its worst effects. In conclusion, Conference, not only are the policies in this motion necessary to improve the quality of life of our people in Britain, they make economic sense and be in no doubt they're vote winners as well. My constituency, Gravesham, is a marginal one, which we must win if there's to be a Labour government. We've made a good start. We are one of the few Labour-controlled boroughs south of the Thames. In this area of Kent, we have 5 out of 6 county councillors, and we've also won the West Kent European seat. I tell you this, I like saying it, but I'm telling you this because we did so campaigning in public issues and issues that affect our people. We must tell people what we stand for, not just what we are against. That's the message our leadership must get across. If we do that, we'll win the general election. Support Composite 15.
Thank you. Jean Christie of Gravesham, seconding Composite 15.
I am behind time, but I'll take 2 speakers. I'll take you at the back. You.
We're now going to move into a very brief open debate on this composite, just 2 speakers, before we then move on to some emergency resolutions.
If you do that,
and after that, to Harriet Harman, the Shadow Chief Secretary, who replies on behalf of the NEC. Now, listening carefully to a point of order which has been shouted from the corners.
Yeah.
I didn't hear it, not sure if he did either. Mr. Knapp.
Thank you, Comrade. Yes.
I'm Ben Summerskill. I'm from Westminster North and I'm supporting Composite 15. And comrades, I'm very proud to be standing here today as part of a tiny minority group, Labour councillors in opposition. But I'm also from a marginal constituency. We need to win if Labour's going to win government. And I tell you, I'm sorry Gordon Brown's not here, but since last week, people come up to me every day in the ward I represent, and they tell me, we're behind Labour now. Gordon Brown's new symbiotic economic partnership between capital and Labour, that's a winner. Oh, on the walkways, they're talking about nothing else, I promise you. But I dare to suggest that we need to be campaigning on some simple, straightforward issues as well. And our track record in local government should be one of them. Because it's time we put to bed the Tory lies about Labour councils. Now, you may think you've heard everything about Westminster. You may know about the £20 million gerrymander. Well, you haven't heard the half of it. For a start, it was £40 million. And when the district auditor's hearings start next week, everyone in Britain will be able to hear about the 10,000 pages of secret documents they tried to shred, the references to the tainted people in the woodpile who should be got out of council housing, the instructions to officers to be mean and nasty to the homeless to get them to go elsewhere, and the attempts to export the vulnerable people in our locality anywhere in Britain where their vote wouldn't count. That's the callous disregard that Tories in local government have for the people of this country. You might have thought that having been caught with their trousers down in Westminster, they'd now keep their hands in their pockets. But no, I can tell you since May, we've seen multi-million-pound property developers given planning permissions once they've employed Conservative members of the Planning Committee to act as surveyors on their behalf. We've seen hundreds of thousands of pounds given to consultants for market testing when the Tories secretly knew there was no market to test in the first place. And we've found the secret instructions that only pavements in Conservative wards are to be repaired. Even the pavements we walk on are being gerrymandered. And last week, we found that Conservative councillors in Westminster, the ones who claim to cost you less, have spent £20,000 entertaining one another at posh restaurants. The Dorchester, the Savoy, Chevry Chambertin and Burgundy, Bordeaux, nothing was too good for them. And comrades, let's be clear, that's the truth about Tory councils. They start with their snouts in the trough and they end up with the rips on the rakes. And the lies.
That was a good ending. Let's leave it at that. Thank you very much.
No, they keep laughing. It's not my fault. They start.
Sorry.
I will finish.
Your time's up. That was a good ending. Thank you very much.
Well, support Composite 15, comrades.
Ben Summerskill getting carried away with the laughter from Westminster North and having a quiet dig there at Gordon Brown, who in his speech last week talked of post-neoclassical endogenous growth theory and symbiotic relationships between growth and investment, which raised a few eyebrows, to put it politely. The debate continues. Last speaker on this section on public services.
You might remember that John Major began his election campaign this year for the local government and for the European elections in Essex. He visited Basildon and he visited Harlow, my hometown. And you know what happened, of course, in the local elections. We won Basildon, we won Harlow, and in the European elections we won Essex South, we won Essex West and Hertfordshire East, and we won 7 out of the 8 European seats in the southeast of England. Now, I'm sure you might think that it was due to our wonderful candidates like me, because we were standing, that we won the European seats, or indeed to the wonderful nature of our European policy. But as you recall, Europe did not feature very much in the European elections. One of the key things that did, though, was the state and the declining conditions of our public services. And in time after time, on the doorstep and in campaigning, many people from middle-class areas in this most unlikely Labour seat of Essex West and Hertfordshire East, which has 7 Tory MPs representing it, a majority of 128,000 in the 92 election, which we overturned, raised the issue of the public services, the fact that their children were going to schools with declining standards, that their hospitals were being run down, that the roads are being run down, and that the public transport system is being run down. So the quality of the public services is actually bringing middle-class voters over to us directly. We have to be much more radical in our advocacy of a regenerated, revitalised public sector under a Labour government, and that will win us the next general election too. The second point I want to make is that there's a European dimension which the resolution refers to. The Acquired Rights Directive, the CHUPI regulations, have protected many workers in Britain from the worst excesses of the Tory government. But as you know, the Tories have a selective view of Europe. They want to be opted out of the social chapter, but when it comes to things that affect them, they want the European Commission to revise the directive so that it weakens the protection given to workers. Well, I've got news for them. The European Parliament has just appointed me to be in charge of forming an opinion on the revised directive which the Commission has brought forward. And you can be sure that this Essex man, representing the Labour movement, will make sure that any recommendation which comes from the Parliament will delay, will deflect, and will avoid weakening workers' rights in Europe overall and weakening workers' rights in Britain. And one of the reasons why Europe is increasingly important to the Labour movement is that these laws help to protect us, which is why we should opt into the social protocol and why we should protect ourselves against the Tory attacks on working rights through weakening of the directive. And I support Composite 15.
That was Huw Kerr, the Member of the European Parliament for Essex West and Hampshire East, the last speaker in that section of the debate on public services. We're now going to move on to 2 emergency resolutions, the first on the Swan Hunter shipyard, the second on Hatfield and Broughton airfield manufacturing companies. And that first emergency resolution, which is number 3 on Swan Hunter, will be moved by Jenny Lowry of the MSF.
Chair, Conference, Mary Mulgrove, Ward End CLP, moving the emergency motion on Swan Hunters. Conference, Swan Hunter Shipyard, through dedication, hard work and commitment, has developed a reputation as one of the world's leading shipyards. The Wall's End workforce has demonstrated again and again that they can build the world's finest warships. During the Falklands conflict, the workers at Swans worked day and night to complete HMS Illustrious 12 months ahead of schedule. Against that background, conference, those very workers have been rewarded with a kick in the teeth from the Tory government. Over the past 17 months, the workforce has been reduced from 2,500 workers to just 500. And by the beginning of November, the only workers left at Swans would be those required by the receivers to wind up the company. Chair, the deliberate murder of swan hunters by the British government is nothing short of a crime against humanity. I live in Wallsend. I see every day the damage done by this government. Our high street is now a sea of for sale signs, and with the closure of the yard, Wallsend will lose all hope. Chair, the Life for Swans campaign, organised by the Swan Hunters Trade Unions, has been first class, a campaign of which our movement can be proud. It has kept alive hope, it has pulled our community together, it has demonstrated clearly how swans can be saved, but most importantly, it has laid the blame for swans' plight clearly at the feet of the government. It is not because of lazy workers, it is not because of greedy trade unions, it is not because of a lack of skills or expertise. No conference, Swan Hunters faces its present plight because our government has no commitment to industry, no commitment to manufacturing, no commitment to skilled and dedicated workers. In short, colleagues, they have no commitment to the future of our country. Conference, I firmly believe that in time the full story will emerge about the government's deliberate murder of swan hunters. It will show that it always wanted the yard to close, how it never acted to encourage a buyer, and in the worst case, actually stepped in behind the scenes to discourage Bremer Vulcan, the German shipbuilder, from buying the yard. As this motion makes clear, the campaign to save swan hunters has now reached a crucial stage. By mid-November, unless a buyer is found, the yard will be closed and the working life of our community will be destroyed. Chair, it is still not too late for the government to act. We do not ask for special privileges, no handouts, no subsidies. All we ask is for a fair deal on a level playing field. Conference, I urge you, please pass this motion and let's give one more push to get this government off the fence and onto our side. Chair, I move the motion.
Mary Muldrow from Wallsend, underlining the appeal in the emergency resolution itself. This time Mr Blair back on the platform listening to that, and the call on the government is to place work with Swan Hunter immediately and to lend all necessary assistance to ensure that a purchaser is secured. And with that huddle on the platform, we move to the seconder, Jenny Lowry from the NSF.
Today, that is down to just over 500, with the prospect that by the end of the year, the yard will have closed altogether. The day after CMN withdrew its bid for the yard, Tynesyde's biggest engineering company, Parsons, announced 600 redundancies. In 2 days, Tyneside's industrial base was demolished, and all for the cost of a few £100,000. Money that the MOD originally promised CMN for the completion of the yard's last order. The closure of Swan Hunters is a disgrace. The blame lies with the government and cannot be justified on either defence or industrial grounds. The closure of Swans means that Britain will be left with only one builder of large warships. Yet government defence procurement policy is said to be based on competitive tendering. If there is no market for large warships, the MOD should have directed other types of defence work to the yard. This would have been a cheaper option than closure. The impact of reduced competition, the loss of tax revenue and the unemployment benefit totals much more than the small subsidy required to keep the yard open. And keeping the yard open would have had the added advantage of allowing Swans to remain a potential competitor for future warship orders. Keeping the yard open would help to save the community. But the Tories aren't interested in saving communities like Tyneside. It could be said that that is the price we pay for voting against them at election times. But the government, and in particular the President of the Board of Trade, should be forced to explain exactly why they think the economy will gain by letting swans die. Now that they are in the last years of a decade and a half of disaster, they are leaving us with a legacy of industrial vandalism and decline. Even their own local MPs and councillors are urging them to save the yard and call a halt to their industrial policies. The fact is, however, that there is very little to save. Shipyards, steel mills, coal mines, aerospace and defence plants. Few industries have escaped. In their place have come empty office blocks and out-of-town shopping malls, and a few expensive quangos, which so far have created more problems than they have solved. The Tyne and Wear Development Corporation has talked vaguely of investing 15 million in speculative office space. The Tyneside Training and Enterprise Council, which claims to be an instrument of job creation, has only so far come up with counselling sessions for unemployed workers. In other words, these expensive white elephants have not created a single job in Tyneside in the past year. The only people to benefit...
Ask the conference to support your view.
Right. I ask you to support.
Kenny Lowry of the MSF.
I call emergency resolution number 8 on economic policy that will be moved by the MSF and seconded by the Transport and General Workers Union.
Chair, Conference. Reg Smith, MSF. Moving emergency resolution number 8. Raytheon American Company, based in Little Rock, President Clinton's hometown, brought corporate jets from British Aerospace in August 1993 for £250 million. At the time, the business had recorded a £6 million profit, an order book worth £285 million. It was sold completely free from debt. It was sold because neither British Aerospace nor the government were prepared to find the investment for a new plane to secure its future. The manufacturing side of the business at Broughton, Chester, where the 800 and 1000 series executive jets are produced. 550 people are employed there, and at the design centre in Hatfield in Hertfordshire, another 1,000 people are employed. The unions, and in particular MSF, warned at the time that selling to Raytheon was not a safe option. The technology would be lost to the UK. It was like selling the family silver. We knew that it was only a matter of time before Raytheon would move the operation to the United States. British Aerospace sale of the business was for short-term financial gain. The 800 and 1000 series executive jets were the world market leaders. At the time of the sale, the market was in temporary decline and due to the recession. However, all the predictions are that the market would recover during the mid-late 1990s. On Thursday, the 15th of September, 1994, Roy Norris, president of Raytheon Corporate Jets, announced what amounted to a phased closure of their Chester and Hatfield sites by the mid-1997 and transferring their business, all of their business, to the United States. As a result, 872 people will lose their jobs and therefore their living. If this proposed transfer of work to America goes ahead, it will result in a loss of essential skills and will have a devastating effect on the economy in Hatfield and Chester and North Wales area. There is a knock-on effect to the British Aerospace Airbus at Broughton, who produced the wings for the jets. They have already announced a review of their operations and have identified at least 180 more jobs that will be affected by the Raytheon announcement. Further potential job losses will be lost within Airbus itself. This is envisaged. As the Mayor of Stevenage, we have in the past sustained job losses in the aerospace industry. We therefore have great sympathy for the towns and communities like Hatfield, Weybridge, Bracknell, Preston are now totally without any aerospace presence on their employment base. The waste of skills and technologies is appalling. The victims have very little for alternatives. All this without any help from the government to sustain a valuable aerospace industry in the UK. We will mount a campaign in Parliament and in America. We ask you to give your support and we ask you to vote for the motion and demand that the British government abandon its leave it to the marketplace policy and intervenes to save these jobs and crucial wealth-creating technology for the future of Britain.
Reg Smith of the MSF, and listening intently on the platform. His last conference as General Secretary, the man there with the grey hair and the moustache, Larry Whitty. One of Mr Blair's first decisions was to move him aside from the key post of General Secretary to a post where he's looking after and coordinating the party's European policy, and denials from the party's central office that was in fact a demotion. They're saying that it's a key post. We're moving on. Jack Dromey, who in fact is Harriet Harman's husband, is going to second that emergency motion number 8.
Who then asset stripped the company, transferring both production and research and development back to America, offering, I kid thee not, jobs to those being made redundant in Kansas. Where was the local MP, the Hertfordshire Spiv, David the Mouth Evans? Nowhere. Where was the man who promised to intervene after every meal? His silence was deafening. Our immediate task, therefore, is to back the call for government to act over Raytheon and to back the effort being made by Barrie Jones, who represents the Chester plant. But we've got a broader task as well in the defence sector. Peace means change for defence workers. No one wants to sustain the historic high levels of defence expenditure in Britain. But in an uncertain world, change should follow a defence review to define our new role on the international stage. Instead, the Treasury has called the tune as ministers have cut defence expenditure. First, because the government has mismanaged the economy, and now because the Tories want to fund tax-cutting bribes to win the next general election. Ministers have also failed to manage change. Britain, Europe's most defence-dependent economy, needs active government to work in partnership with employers, local authorities, defence workers and their communities to diversify. Yet July's defence cost study, which sacked 20,000 workers, did not see one measure to help those who serve this nation well. Defence communities are being devastated with public expenditure shifting from national security to social security. Now, to diversify, employers must act. No one can do it for them. But what they can do is limited without a government framework. Swan's shipbuilding is a tragic example. We've got a surplus of capacity here in Britain. Two choices: either cut capacity on the one hand with devastating consequences, or take steps on the other hand by way of an industrial strategy to generate work to fill spare capacity. The markets are there. The question is, who will benefit? British yards or competitor countries that think long and believe in partnership. Finally, friends, defence workers look for hope. Instead, they have been abandoned. And that's why they are now turning to Labour. Because Labour offers a message of hope, of managed change, of defence diversification, driven by a dynamic defence diversification agency. Now, I can announce today that they have found Lord Lucan. They're now looking for Tory MPs in defence constituencies. But there'll be no hiding place for them, because Parliament will vote on the 17th and 18th of October on the government's plans to sack 20,000 defence workers. How will those Tories vote? Will they put their constituents before their careers? Will they keep quiet as they climb the greasy pole of ambition? We know how Tony and the Labour Party will vote. They will vote for our members, for defence communities, because it is Labour that is the friend of defence workers and defence communities. Thank you.
Jack Dromey of the TNG, and there'll be several members in the hall now waiting rather nervously, perhaps confidently in the case of Margaret Beckett for the results of the NEC elections. I'd be very astonished if she didn't win a place, and it might well be at the expense of Hilary Armstrong, who we see there, whose key role in securing the one-member, one-vote victory for the late John Smith last year certainly upset some of the unions involved. The next speaker on the podium is Harriet Harman, the Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury. Her husband, giving way to her. She will wrap up this all-day debate on the economy.
I'm very sorry.
Before that, we'll get a point of order.
Thank you. I would now like to call on Harriet Harman,
which I think has been rejected out of
MP,
hand.
the Shadow Chief
And I can see that
Secretary
Harriet Harman is now
Treasury,
making her way to the podium. Her
reply to the
performance,
debate on behalf
roundly
of the
criticised
National
by
Executive Committee.
several people in the
Harriet
party
Harman.
over the last year, and she'll want to prove that she's more than up to the job.
Following this wide-ranging debate, I'd like to start by briefly telling you what the NEC recommendations are for each of the composite motions and the resolutions that are for decision this afternoon. On economic policy, composites 1, 2 and 3, we recommend acceptance. Composites 4 and 5, we recommend you oppose because they call for our economic policy to be based on wholesale nationalisation of private companies, and we've not supported that before. We're not recommending we support that now. Fair tax and benefit. On composite 6, we recommend acceptance. Composite 7 and 8, we fully agree with the sentiments, but we're asking you to remit, because what we're asking you to do is agree a comprehensive set of proposals and make a choice of priorities rather than making policy piecemeal by picking a particular tax or a particular spending commitment. On the Child Support Act, composite 9, we recommend acceptance. Rights at work, composites 10, 11 and 12, we recommend you accept. Composite 13, we ask you to oppose. It asks us to abolish trade union ballots. It's been rejected by the party since 1986, and it's been rejected by the TUC as well. Resolution 172, as amended, we recommend acceptance. Efficient public services, composite 15, we recommend acceptance. Resolution 188, we ask you to oppose. Again, it doesn't make sense to pluck out a specific individual spending commitment in isolation from our overall priorities. The emergency resolutions on Swan Hunter and aerospace, we ask you to accept, and that's the NEC recommendations. But before I turn in greater depth to the central issues in today's debate, I've got an announcement which I'm sure conference will be interested in. Surpassing even the performance of his predecessor Norman Lamont and his leader John Major, Kenneth Clarke has become the new holder of the record for the fastest ever broken promise. 3 days ago, he sent a letter to Tory constituency parties saying, "I promise tax cuts will come." Those were his whispered words on Friday night. But in the cold light of Saturday morning, less than 24 hours later, in place of the promises of the night before, came the harsh reality. Another new Tory tax. This time, an insurance premium tax. A tax on the victims of crime. The more you suffer, the more you pay. And doesn't this just sum up the Tories? They're out of touch, they're making us pay for their failure, and they're doing it in the unfairest possible way. And the contrast between the Tories and Labour could not be clearer. Labour's in touch with the interests of ordinary families. That's why Labour will stop the market meddling in the health service and improve patient care. That's why Labour will invest for economic success by releasing councils' capital receipts and starting building programmes. Labour will bring fairness to Britain, and that's why Labour will end poverty pay and introduce a statutory minimum wage. No wonder the Tories are finding the feel-good factor so elusive. They're completely out of touch. To anyone but the Tories, it's obvious. People who are out of work don't feel good. People who are in work but worried about losing their job don't feel good. People worried about their children's schooling and their parents' old age don't feel good. And people certainly don't feel good when their standard of living drops because of tax increases. They don't feel good, they feel betrayed. And people will never again feel good about this Tory government because they'll never again feel secure under this Tory government. But the feel-good factor will return on the day of the next general election when the people of Britain vote this government of betrayal and failure out of office. This is a government marked by failure. Above all, it's marked by failure on the economy. After the two worst recessions since the war, voters have learnt a very harsh lesson. Any Tory recovery is simply an interval between two Tory recessions. And it's the Tories' failure on the economy which has led to rising taxes and cuts in investment, and it's their continuing economic failure which means they can't and never will deliver on their tax or public spending promises. But no matter how bad things are, the Tories still try and cover up their failure, and that's why we've spent the last year exposing the Tory tax lies. And our tax campaign has contributed to our victories in the council elections and the Euro elections. In every constituency, party members have been campaigning on tax and getting signatures for Labour's VAT petition. Thousands of you, party members and trade unionists up and down the country, have been taking our petition out onto the streets. And every time someone signs your petition, it hammers home the two central messages of our tax campaign. The Tories can't be trusted on tax, and the Tories are the party of unfair tax. And our campaign has exposed the lies of the Tory general election campaign in 1992. The Tories promised tax cuts year on year, and they delivered tax rises on earnings and on spendings, adding up to an extra £800 a year more tax for the typical family. And our battle against Conservative tax conceit will go on right up till the next general election. Because we all know, don't we, that the pre-election tax bribes will come. But we will remind people of what the Chancellor himself admitted after the last two budgets. He admitted that all his tax increases added up to the equivalent of an extra 7 pence on the basic rate of income tax. So when people say to you, as they will, but the Tories have cut my taxes, remind them of that 7p in the pound extra tax increase. Now, this is a government which says it has an instinct for tax cuts, but why should we listen to their instincts? Britain will judge them on their record. And by exposing the Tory tax-cutting myth, we've highlighted the true divide on tax between us and the Conservatives, because the real contrast is fair tax or unfair tax. The Tories make everyone pay VAT on their gas and electricity bills. A Labour government will make the top executives of those privatised industries pay tax on their executive share options. The Tories make everyone pay higher national insurance contributions. Labour will stop millionaires paying no tax at all. Everyone is paying more tax under the Tories, everyone that is, except people who earn more than £64,000 a year. They're paying less tax. And that's the Tory tax system. Two different sets of rules. For ordinary families, it's pay as you earn. For the super rich and Tory donors, it's pay if you like. And in place of the old principle, from each according to his ability to each according to need, it's now the new Tory principle, from each according to his accountant to each depending on his donation. And under the Tories, the government and the economy are run like a twisted game of Monopoly. Just like Monopoly, everything is for sale, from the water board to the electricity companies and even the railways. But this is a rigged game of Monopoly, because whatever square the Tories' friends land on, it's the same result. Yes, you pass go. Yes, you can collect as much as you like. Congratulations, you've been awarded the chairmanship of an NHS trust, collect £19,000. You've been sacked as a director of a privatised utility, but never mind, congratulations, collect a £500,000 golden handshake. Congratulations, you've received an executive share option, pay no further tax. But under Labour, the tax system will be different. The first budget of the next Labour government will put an end to the tax abuses, close the tax loopholes and stop the tax dodges. And we will make the tax system fair for ordinary people in this country. Fair tax will be Labour's guiding principle, and the choice facing people at the next election will not be between high or low tax, but between Labour's fair tax or the Tories' unfair tax. But there are two questions about tax, not just who pays, but what it's for. Because the Tories are taking more in tax than the last Labour government, and they've also had resources undreamt of by earlier governments. £118 billion in North Sea oil revenue, £69 billion in privatisation receipts selling the family silver. So where has all this money gone? We can see it hasn't gone into our schools. We know it hasn't gone into our hospitals, and it certainly hasn't gone into the railway network. Instead, all that money has gone on Tory failure. It's gone to pay the price of poverty, unemployment, and crime. The Tories are wasting our taxes. The Tories are wasting our public money. The Tories are wasting our nation. Public spending takes the same share of national wealth today as it did in 1979. But public money has been shifted away from investment in the future towards paying for the government's mistakes of the past. So, for example, today, the government is having to spend more on unemployment and poverty than they're investing in our education. If the Tories were now spending the same share of our national wealth on education as Labour did in 1979, there would this year be an extra £1.3 billion, going into our education budget. And that would go a long way. It would mean every 3- and 4-year-old could have had a nursery place, and class sizes in every school could be cut. In housing, the shift is even clearer. In 1979, under Labour, for every pound that we spent on housing benefit, we spent £6 on building homes. Today, the Tories actually spend more on housing benefit than on building homes. And what do the Tories do? They blame the victims. They cut benefits. Labour will cut the need for benefits by putting people back to work. And Speaker after Speaker this morning has talked about what Labour will do. Labour will release the capital receipts and put construction workers back to work. Labour will modernise our infrastructure in a partnership with the private sector, as Callie Mountford from Sheffield said this morning. We will guarantee training places for the young and long-term unemployed, as Rosie Newbigin from Bedfordshire told Conference this morning. And we will have a national childcare strategy so that mothers can go out to work instead of bringing up their family on benefits. Labour means because Labour means a nation at work, not a nation on benefit. Labour means investing in success for the future, not paying for the mistakes of the past. Labour means spending on frontline services, on doctors and teachers, on nurses and home helps, not on management consultants and bureaucracy like the Tories. And at the next election, the choice on public spending will be this. The choice will be between the Tories, a party using public spending to mop up the consequences of their economic failure, and Labour, which will use public spending to invest in our economic and our social future. The divide between us and the Tories on public spending is linked to the key economic choice facing Britain today. The Tories' economic strategy, a strategy of laissez-faire, low investment, low skill, high unemployment, has failed. What the country needs is Labour's approach. It is the business of government to ensure a high investment, high skill, full employment future for this country. Britain cannot succeed by simply trying to undercut wages in other countries. We can only prosper on the basis of the quality and skills of our workforce and our products. Labour offers a future of economic success and social justice together, and that's why we'll bring in a statutory minimum wage. Now, by showing today in this debate that there is a better way for Britain, you have spoken for the nation. But the legacy of 15 Tory years is not just the unemployment and injustice which we've all talked about today. It's the cynicism too. Cynicism born of Tory broken promises. And we've all heard people say, haven't we? We've all heard people say, well, you just can't trust politicians. And we've heard them say, it doesn't matter who's in government, because government doesn't make any difference to me. The Tories have betrayed people's trust and destroyed their hopes. And the task ahead for Labour is to do more than just rebuild our economy and our public services. We have to rebuild the confidence of the British people in our democracy. Confidence that has been shattered by Tory lies and betrayal. People want a government that will tell it straight. A government which will not make promises they can't keep. A government they can trust. Because people will only let themselves hope for more from government when they feel they can trust what those politicians say. They want a government that will make a difference. A government that knows that people working together in a strong community can achieve more together than they can achieve alone. A government that won't just stand back and let the country decline. They want a government which can offer them trust and hope. They want a Labour government.
So Harriet Harman, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, winds up this afternoon's debate, takes her seat back on the platform between Gordon Brown and the new leader Tony Blair, sitting right at the end there. And very respectful applause from conference, eager to get on with the votes. As we've said, it's a new system. We've got 15 composites, resolution, 2 emergency resolutions, and of course an NEC statement, all to be voted on this afternoon.
Next process, which of course is that decision making. So can I call therefore the vote on Composite 1? The NEC recommendation is to accept. All those in favour, please show.
Now, Joyce Gill, that's fairly
Thank
clear,
you.
straightforward,
Those against?
a system we recognise,
That's
hand
carried
vote,
overwhelmingly.
and Composite 1,
2, the
which
NEC
is
recommendation
full
is
employment
to
to national
accept.
minimum wage, has gone through,
All
no
those
problem.
in favour, please show.
I think it's quite interesting that this
Composite.
time there were more constituency delegates than trade union delegates, and that's the first time that that's been.
Composite 2 has gone through there as well, and that's the motion on a minimum wage, accepted by conference, but of course no figure was given, despite the fact that an original motion submitted, a £4 figure, around £4 was mentioned. Composite 3 has gone through, and that's the motion on
The recommendation of the NEC is to
information
oppose.
technology and
All
craft
those
support.
in favour of Composite 4, please show. All those against?
And again, the
Composite
leadership of
4 is
1,
lost.
they didn't want to see
Composite
Composite
5,
4, which is
the
to do with
NEC
more public
recommendation
ownership
is
and
to
state
oppose.
intervention going through, and
All those
conference
in favour of
have,
Composite 5,
as they
please
wished,
show.
opposed it.
Those against? That is defeated.
Composite 5, similarly, the leadership was against. That's a public ownership motion.
If you require a card vote, kindly ask for it before I
That's
announce
right.
the result.
Call for a card vote there, but too late. So the chairman is overruling that call, although it seems quite clear from this position, I think, Joyce, that that was a clear show of hands against that motion.
Oh, absolutely. There was no doubt about that. And the chair is absolutely right.
Composite 5 was a
The
left-wing
NEC
motion.
recommendation is to accept. I don't think you want to turn that chance down.
Looking
All
for
those in favour, please show. All those against? That's carried. Thank you very
and
much.
again, as
Composite
leadership wanted,
7,
Composite
the
6,
NEC
a T&G
recommendation is to
motion
remit,
looking
and I
for
would ask the mover if
improved
they
pensions
would
and upgraded
indicate
child
their view
benefits,
on
and the
that
national
matter.
minimum wage went through.
I'm sorry. Can I have a clear indication as to the decision of the mover?
The mover's moving to the rostrum now in response to the chair.
Chair Conference, John Harding, Macclesfield CLP, mover of Composite 7. I agree to remit.
Thank you very much.
Right, so the mover of the motion, and this was to
Composite
reduce
the
VAT on domestic
recommendation
fuel to the lowest
of
level
the
European
NEC
law
is
allows,
to
that's
seek
5%,
remittance.
has agreed
Can I
with
have the
leadership that it
decision
should
of
be
the
remitted.
mover on that issue? Composite 8.
Same position here. They're asking for remission.
Now, Composite 8, you'll remember, was a motion which opposed all means testing of benefits, and the executive wanted this to be remitted for further consideration. Presumably, Joyce, because there was implicit spending commitment.
Yes, yeah, I mean, quite considerable. And
Middleton
also
CLP
because it
is the
asked for rejection of the Social Justice Commission responses, and that the NEC couldn't accept.
But they've only asked for remission on this. They haven't opposed
Well,
it, so they have
that's
some
right.
sympathy with...
with the sentiment of the
Yes.
resolution, yes. But it's taking a long time to find the mover to know whether to remit.
Is he here or not? Is the delegate from Middleton and Haywood here? Is the seconder present?
Composite 8 was moved by Haywood and Middleton Constituency Party and seconded by Caerphilly. They're looking for both the mover and the seconder to see whether they will accept the executive recommendation this motion should be remitted.
It's
Of course, in this
extraordinary
hall,
that they're not in the hall for their own resolutions.
mind you, I mean, the hall is so full, Joyce, that
Yes,
making your
that's
way to the
true.
platform is quite a struggle.
Comrade, I've called you down just so we make it quite clear. The request is that you remit.
I've been informed by the proposer that he intends to remit. I so move.
Thank you very much.
So they're the representative from Caerphilly accepting the executive's recommendation that Composite 8 be remitted. So on to Composite 9, the Child Support Act motion,
The recommendation of the NEC
which
is to
the
accept.
NEC
All those in
recommends
favour, please
acceptance.
show.
And it looks like, again, they've got it.
Any against? Carried with a few against. Thank you very much. The rights at work Composite 10.
So we move on to the
recommendation is
workers'
to
rights
accept.
motions. There
All
were a
those
few
in
of them.
favour, please show. Those against?
Composite 10 was the
Thank you very
pro-social
much. That's
chapter
carried
motion.
overwhelmingly.
Again, that's gone
Composite
through.
11, the recommendation is to accept. All those in favour, please show.
Another national minimum
Those
wage
against?
motion here. Again,
That's carried unanimously.
carried unanimously.
Composite 12, the recommendation is to accept.
Composite 12
All those in
refers
favour
to
of
the document
acceptance,
which
please
Robin
show.
Cook launched this morning,
Thank you.
trade
Those
policy,
against?
and
That's also carried unanimously.
that's gone through too. So now
Composite 13.
we come to Composite 13, which of course
Composite 13, a card vote's called for. Will
Arthur
delegates
Scargill
remain in
spoke
their
to
places?
so
Are the tellers in
passionately
their
this
places?
afternoon. Card vote's been called for. So for the first time, we're going to see the new procedure. Or are we? Here's Arthur Scargill coming up to do what, Joyce?
Well, I don't know, because he shouldn't have a point of order in the middle of a vote.
Well, no, he had a point of order before, which I didn't think was strictly a point of order.
Arthur, can I ask you what you're on the rostrum for? I'll tell you why. Because you can't take a point of order when I'm
Chairman, I
taking the
haven't called
vote.
for a card vote.
Well, who did? It was clear enough.
You've asked everybody else who's the mover or the seconder whether they're in favour of remission or what they want to do. Now, you haven't asked
No,
the
he
people
hasn't. That is
who moved
incorrect.
this resolution.
It's only on
As far as
remission
we're
that you ask the
concerned,
move and
we've got the
seconder.
resolution
Anybody in the
putting
hall
them
can
all
ask
away.
for a card
And
vote.
constitutionally,
So
you should take a show of hands first in any case.
So strictly out of order there.
Yes. And the chair had made it clear that he had to, a card vote had to be called before show of hands.
Of composite number 5, when we had such a close vote, I approached the rostrum to ask for a card vote, which was denied. I am formally requesting, as the mover of composite.
Right, so back to Composite 5, which
that we
of
be
course...
given the opportunity of a card vote. It was a close vote.
This is way out of order. It's past the procedures. That vote's been taken and doesn't actually solve the problem in respect of Composite 13, which the chair's now got to sort out.
We passed that. We're at composite 13, and the card vote has been called for. Now, in those circumstances, I am obliged to hold a card vote. Would the delegates remain in their places? And would the tellers advise me that they're in their places? And can we take the vote?
Right,
Are the
let's
tellers
just
in their
review
places?
what we saw there,
Yes.
Joyce. Now,
Will you please
everything
take
went
the vote?
swimmingly. Now we're about to see the first card vote.
Card
According
vote
to the
number
new
one.
rules,
Card vote number
that
one.
means that we're not going to see the union bosses holding up one card and representing thereby hundreds of thousands of votes. Here we see the delegates, and each delegate has a slip in his book of voting slips, which represents the number of votes that he's representing.
Right. That's right.
However, they will be voting according to party policy, we assume, on this one. According to union policy, I beg your pardon, on this one.
Well,
the union representatives.
I would assume that the unions would vote on union policy on this one, and that may be why Mr. Scargill didn't want a card vote, because it may well be that he's going to get overwhelmingly defeated.
Well, let's remind ourselves what Composite 13 was, which the NUM and Arthur Scargill proposed, and it was to do away with the government's trade union reforms. Employees should have the right to strike without fear of dismissal, he said. There should be no limit to the number of peaceful pickets allowed. Secondary action should be allowed again. No legal action such as fines or sequestration against unions or members who take part in an industrial dispute. Now, over the last few years, of course, as those various trade union reforms have come in, Labour in opposition has been very critical. However, you're saying that it's unlikely that this motion will find favour with conference.
Yeah, I think that although it took a little time, the party policy is now not to go into illegality of any sort, and this resolution actually calls for it. And it wouldn't be a good message for the party to be seen to be accepting an illegal act.
Yes.
So I
Morris.
can't see the unions accepting that either.
We see some of the old barons, they were dubbed there. John Edmonds, the GMB, Bill Morris we saw earlier. There was a time when a card vote would have been done much more swiftly. Gentlemen like these would have lifted their hands with their cards.
That's right. But I mean, I think that it has to be understood that there really are fundamental differences this time in that every vote is a separate vote. And although the unions may have have given guidance to their members. If, in fact, one of their delegates decided to vote differently, it would still be a valid vote. So, you know, it is important that they collect every individual vote. And it's also a secret vote. I mean, in the sense that if you wanted to hide how you're putting it into the box, you could equally do that. And and there's no way of the vote ever being disclosed.
So although we heard union leaders say this morning that delegates would vote according to union policy, once they're in the hall with their voting slips, they can do as they please?
Well, they could do as they please. It would be then for the union to decide whether they're ever delegates again. But that would be a matter for the union. But as far as the party is concerned, it's entirely up to the individual.
Now, we're concentrating on the unions here. Of course, the constituency parties represent some 30% of the total vote here at conference. A constituency party is likely to have individual policy on this particular issue, on trade union reform.
Oh, it's quite possible, because the union, many constituency parties will go through the agenda with their delegates and ask the delegates to take note of the views of the constituency when they register their votes.
Now, when are we going to get the result of this card vote? Because all the slips are bar-coded. Now, will we get it before we're out of time?
I would very much doubt it. It might be possible, but they are estimating 15 to 20 minutes for a vote.
Outside the hall, Jon Sopel's met up with a few people. John?
Sheena, thank you. Well, a lot of the talk outside the hall is about the results of the National Executive Committee election. Nicholas Jones, our political correspondent, joins us now. Nick, what's the rumour?
The rumours certainly are that Margaret Beckett is definitely onto the National Executive. She is definitely going to be one of the new women on the National Executive, and there will be an increase this year from 7 to 9 in the total number of women on the National Executive. But there are some suggestions that Hilary Armstrong, who was PPS to John Smith, might have lost her seat. That's certainly the first indication.
And any other women who might be on, new faces?
Yes, there are going to be new faces in the trade union section. Maggie Jones of the union Unison is being mentioned as one of the new women who might get a place. But this is one of the changes that's taking place in the National Executive. Each year they've been increasing the number of women so that half of the places on the National Executive will be filled by women by next year.
And what about Mo Mowlam?
Yes, Mo Mowlam is also one of the new women. She is definitely on. Most people are saying that she will be on the executive. The two other new possible faces that are being mentioned are Jack Straw. He's also likely to win a place in the constituency section, and also Chris Smith. It's most interesting because the Labour Party has changed. It has, in the constituencies, had a proper postal ballot of all the members.
Nick, let me stop you there. Let's go back to the hall.
John, thank you.
That's carried overwhelmingly. Thank you. The emergency motion number
and
3
we're moving on to emergency motion number 3, which was on Swan Hunter. Leadership voted for this motion, and conference have agreed with that recommendation.
Motion number 8 on aerospace. The recommendation is to accept.
Emergency motion number 8 was lamenting British Aerospace's job losses as the American company Raytheon have removed those jobs, asking for government intervention. Again, that's been carried. And Robin Cook's Winning for Britain industrial strategy, which was launched this morning, is also being accepted by conference.
Thank you very much.
However, there's some... Someone's unhappy on the floor.
To the NEC ballot results.
Someone's trying to raise a point of order with the chair.
Yes, comrade. Would the McDonald make way for him?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what he actually wants to say to the chair. It's perfectly legitimate.
I will try to hear. Yes, and he's coming up to the platform. He's going to speak. Gordon Collings had actually quite an exciting afternoon after all, hasn't he?
He has.
And
it was very flat this morning, but it's picked its...
Comrade Chair, on a point of order, I refer to the procedural rules of the party, 4.3, and in particular to Rule 3 thereon. I am very, very reluctant to do this, and I have no axe to grind, because my constituency's mandate was to vote against composite resolution number 5. I think we've had a good day conference, and I think the most important thing is that we go away to as best degree as possible united. People come to conference, they vote in accordance with their mandate, and by and in large, win or lose, they go away. But, Chair, on a point of order, please. But, Chair, could we let me finish, Chair?
No, if there's a point of order, can you make it, please?
Very well, I'll make the point of order.
Point of order is about...
The rule says that when a card vote is called for, it shall be conducted, etc., etc., etc. We've got a new procedure this year. The rule refers to the arrangements laid down by Conference Arrangements Committee. There is nothing in the CAC report to say that the card vote has to be called for before the verbal vote. There is clearly confusion. In the interests of fairness, whichever side of the issue you're on, I think this conference and this nation needs a clear decision on whether Labour favours or doesn't favour the nationalisation of the utilities.
Is that a fair point, Joyce? There's nothing in the rules that say the card vote must be called for before the hand vote.
That's right. There's nothing laid down in the rules, but then an awful lot of the conference procedures aren't laid down into the rules. But it's custom and practice. It's operated always. Other than that, you have people who wait till they see the result of the card vote before they of the hand vote before they call for a card vote, which must be wrong.
Labour Party practice that the card vote must be called for before the announcement of the hand vote.
That's right.
It certainly is. I've seen it happen time after time. Now, comrades, we've finished the voting. We are near the end of the session. We're anxious to know the results of the NEC elections. Can I call on the Chief Scrutineer?
So the point of order rejected, Joyce.
The Chair quite correctly rejected it.
Jim Fitzpatrick, Chief Scrutineer, will give the NEC ballot results now.
Have kindly provided the usual formatted result sheet for your use if you want to do so.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Conference. Jim Fitzpatrick, Fire Brigade Union, Chief Scrutineer. Before I announce the results, I will explain the way the figures will be presented to you. Most results are given as percentages. The figures I announce are a percentage of the total votes cast for all candidates in that section. However, for Divisions 1, 2 and 3 of the National Executive Committee, I will announce the actual number of votes cast. A women's quota system operates in some sections, and any adjustment to fulfil these quotas will be pointed out. Election of Party Treasurer. Tom Burleson, elected unopposed. Election of Party Auditors. David Hopper and Jimmy Knapp, elected unopposed. Elections to the National Constitutional Committee. In the Trade Union Division, 2 persons to be elected. Derek Install and Maureen Rooney, elected unopposed. In the Constituency Division, 1 person to be elected. Shelley Burke, 56.95%. Claudia Slee, 43.05%. I therefore declare that Shelley Burke is elected. In the Women's Division, 1 person to be elected. Diane Hayter is elected unopposed. Elections to the Conference Arrangements Committee. The committee has 7 members, 5 elected by the whole of Conference, of which at least 2 must be women, and 2 elected by constituency parties only, of which at least 1 must be a woman. In the general section, the results are as follows. Richard Balfe, 2.64%. Eddie Bowden, 2.09%. Donna Bryant, 2.42%. Doreen Cameron, 3.02%. Alison Chapman, 2.19%. Peter Edwards, 15.71%. David Hadfield, 3.1%. Patrick O'Hanlon, 14.9%. Margaret Prosser, 17.39%. Paul Tweed, 0.97%. Margaret Wheeler, 16.7%. Frank Wilkinson, 15.95%. Pete Wilsman, 2.92%. I therefore declare the following elected: Margaret Prosser, Margaret Wheeler, Frank Wilkinson, Peter Edwards, and Patrick O'Hanlon. In the CLP section, the results are as follows: Eddie Bowden, 17.18%. Donna Bryant, 19%. Doreen Cameron, 19.24%. Alison Chapman, 17.05%. Paul Tweed, 9.94%. Pete Wilsman, 17.59%. I therefore declare the following elected: Doreen Cameron and Donna Bryant. Elections to the National Executive Committee. Division 1, Trade Unions. 12 to be elected, of which at least 3 must be women. In this section, I will announce the actual number of votes cast for each candidate. Gordon Collings, 3,929,000. Bill Connor, 3,896,000. Dan Duffy, 4,002,000. Nigel Harris, 3,827,000. Derek Hodgson, 3,858,000. Diana Holland, 3,922,000. Charles Kelly, 956,000. Vernon Hintz, 3,985,000. Maggie Jones, 2,319,000. Helen McGrath, 1,717,000. Dennis Nash, 92,000. Richard Rosser, 3,209,000. Tom Sawyer, 3,079,000. Arthur Scargill, 1,068,000. Margaret Wall, 3,889,000. David Ward, 3,088,000. I therefore declare the following elected: Dan Duffy, Vernon Hintz, Gordon Collings, Diana Holland, Bill Connor, Margaret Wall, Derek Hodgson, Nigel Harris, Richard Rosser, David Ward, Tom Sawyer, and Maggie Jones. Division 2, Socialist Societies. 1 to be elected. In this section, I will announce the actual numbers of votes cast for each candidate. John Evans, 25,000. Marianne Hood, 3,000. Joanna Tate, 9,000. I therefore declare that John Evans is elected. Division 3, Constituency Labour Parties. 7 to be elected, of which at least 2 must be women. In this section, I will announce the actual numbers of votes cast for each candidate. Diane Abbott, 36,539. David Blunkett, 80,150. Gordon Brown, 76,753. Robin Cook, 83,923.
And there, I'm afraid we must leave it. Join us again tomorrow. Tony Blair's big speech. It'll be an interesting event, to say the very least. 10:05 BBC One tomorrow morning. Goodbye.
And Tony Blair's vision of the future is explored tonight on BBC One when Panorama joins him talking to people in Southampton, the middle